Good evening. Welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting of May 22nd, 2017. The type of meeting that you're attending or watching tonight is, as I just mentioned, a Committee of the Whole meeting. By that, this is largely a discussion meeting. You're going to hear, frankly, these are some of my favorite meetings because this is where we get down to the nitty-gritty of a lot of the items that are on the agenda before the board this evening. You'll probably hear a lot of questions and answers back and forth, perhaps requests to administration for more information. If and when the board feels like they have exhausted everything that we can discuss about a certain topic and we're ready to vote on that topic, it will be put on an agenda for typically the following week. Sometimes it's 2 weeks down the road, but at our regular or voting meeting. But tonight you will not be hearing any votes being taken on any item before the board. It will all be discussion and getting ready to go to a vote on these items. I do welcome you this evening. We have a number of folks in our audience, and as we do here out in the community, we do have a number of folks, believe it or not, who sit at home and watch these meetings. We're thankful for folks who are interested in the goings-on of the Board of Education. We do have a number of our staff, I know, in our audience this evening. We are thrilled to have our staff at our meetings. This Board of Education takes very seriously getting out into our schools and activities and events of our buildings, and I truly believe that we function best when we have a really deep appreciation and understanding for what each one of us do in this very, very large and successful school district. We have all of the members of our Board of Education, with the exception of Mr. Centers, with us at this time. Mr. Centers will be joining us partway through our meeting this evening. The first item on our agenda this evening is audience communications. If you are here in the audience this evening and you'd like to follow along on our agenda, you can find them on the table just outside the door, along with any blue slips if you'd like to participate in audience communications. If you are at home and you would like to follow along with an agenda, you can find them on our website, which is at www.livoniapublicschools.org. If you hover over the board tab, you can drop down to the agendas and follow along for the evening. As I said, the first item on our agenda this evening is audience communications. Audience communications, for if you are unaware, is a time that the board sets aside to listen to members of our community. It is not a question and answer session, but rather a time for us to listen to any concerns or comments or suggestions that may be brought forth. Those items will be responded back to if there's a specific question that the speaker has asked for an answer to. As far as who and how you may be responded to, as a matter of clarity, the Board of Education has primarily three roles. The first is to hire and evaluate our superintendent. The second is to set policy for the district. And the third is to set long-term goals and to align our finances to those goals. It's broad-reaching, but it's pretty finite in the number of items that are really under our direct control. Most items are of what we call day-to-day or operational in nature, and those are the responsibility of our superintendent, Mrs. Andrea Oquist, and our terrific administrative team and staff that we have employed in our district to serve our students. Therefore, if you have a specific question that you're asking for an answer to, if it pertains to items, the first three items that I mentioned that are under the board's direct responsibility, you can expect your response to come from the Board of Education. If your question is more operational in nature, you can expect a response to come back from our administrative team, either Mrs. Oquist or the appropriate administrator. We do have a policy that says that we are asking each person to take no more than 3 minutes at audience communications. The purpose of this is so that each person is treated fairly and that there's enough time to hear folks in the audience who would like to participate in this portion of our meeting, in addition to getting the work of the Board of Education done on that given evening. Mr. Johnson has been our longtime timekeeper, and if you hear a beep after about 3 minutes, you will know that you have hit that 3 minutes, and if you could conclude your comments at that time, we would appreciate it. We have just found that this is a little bit more polite way than trying to interrupt a speaker at that time. So again, if you could honor our 3-minute time limit, that would be appreciated. We do have two folks who have indicated a desire to participate in audience communications this evening. The first is Emily Crabtree. Emily? And you can come up and join us at the table and take a seat. Yes. And if you could just state your name and address for our record.
Hi, I'm Emily Crabtree. I'm a senior at Stevenson. You said my address?
Yes.
19824 Milburn.
Thank you.
So Mr. Sherbert and I recently met with the Division of Instruction to talk about school start times. I think we had a really great talk, and we thought it would be a good time to bring it open to the public and to the school board. We're suggesting that we change our high school start times and our elementary school start times so that they're flipped, and that high school will start later in the day and elementary school will start a little bit earlier in the day. And the reason for this is that teenagers in our community are very sleep deprived. Teenagers are biologically programmed to get 9 hours of sleep a night, and once kids hit puberty, they hit a sleep delay. So they need to get to bed later, and they need to wake up later. And because of our current system, they can't do either of those things while getting enough sleep at the same time. So this is affecting their grades, their health, and their attendance. There have been many studies, and I think Sherburne sent the research to you, that suggests that when teenagers get more sleep, their grades go up, their ACT scores go up, their SAT scores go up, and that's just the academics. The attendance, as soon as they get more sleep, they did studies in Minnesota, and the American Pediatrics also did studies. Kids come to school more frequently, and kids are absent, and there are fewer tardies. Just from getting a couple hours of sleep a night. There was one study where when they implemented the policy, teenagers got an extra 5 hours of sleep a week, and with that, the school saw far fewer absences and tardies. And perhaps the biggest one, teenagers' health is significantly impacted by sleep deprivation. And the point here is that 2 out of 3 teenagers are sleep deprived right now. And because of that, we see increases in obesity, diabetes, and drug use, and even depression rates. However, schools, when they changed their school start times, as the research showed, they found it easier for kids to pay attention. They found depressive thoughts went away, and teenagers were paying attention in the classroom and feeling better in general. Riskier decisions decreased, and in general, everyone felt better. And the teachers even, they said how much greater their classrooms were running. And the reason we think it's important to do right now isn't just because, we want to make schools start later. It's also because a bunch of schools around the country and in Michigan are doing it. Sturgis, Ann Arbor Public Schools, Ypsilanti have all changed their school start times, and a ton other around the United States are doing it too. So we thought if we could do it, it wouldn't just be a way for us to catch up with all of these other schools. It would be a way for us to lead our school and our district in our county and in Michigan. And this is a very, very brief explanation of why we thought it would be a good idea, and obviously no decisions are going to be made today or in a very long time, but we thought it would be a nice moment to introduce the idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I noticed the question, Emily, on the bottom of your form is there a time in the future when we can talk about this again? The board was made aware that this discussion has begun with you, Mr. Sherburne, with our Division of Instruction, and I would encourage you to go ahead and continue down that path. I understand that has already been discussed as far as a follow-up discussion. The next participant in audience communications this evening is Karla Truxel. Ms. Truxel. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Karla Truxel, and I have 2 children that have come through Livonia Public Schools. When they were in 6th and 8th grade, we lost their cousin, my nephew, to suicide at the age of 19. Mason's death shattered my world, and unfortunately it took me 2 years to realize I needed counseling. However, through that process, my husband and I discovered we needed to take our loss, our journey, and pay it forward to help others. In 2014, we created SPN Survivors, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to reach out, offer support, and bring people together through education and awareness while shining a spotlight on suicide prevention, self-care, mental health first aid, and local, state, and national resources. I think it's perfect that Emily just spoke about teenage health, because that's kind of what we're all about. I'm here tonight to share with you 3 ways that we believe our nonprofit and LPS can work together to create a stronger and healthier community. 1, provide mental health first aid education to members of our community and work to improve our social and emotional health workbook. Both my kids use this, and there's some great things in here, but there's also some sections I think could be greatly improved, and we'd like to help work with you guys on that. 2, provide school counselors and social workers with a comfort kit that we've developed, which is a coping tool for students to use when they're struggling with life challenges. And 3, to participate in You Matter Day activities in September. As a nonprofit, we have 2 annual events, March for Hope in the spring and You Matter Day in September. And as humans, we all have the need to be seen, to be heard, and to be validated in our lives and relationships. We need to know and feel that we matter. Therefore, we would like to invite all parents and students and employees of LPS to join us in creating ripples of kindness across our communities during Suicide Prevention Awareness Month by reaching out to those around you and reminding them that they matter. It's amazing how kind words and actions can create a ripple effect, and many others will benefit from the positive things you do and say. We encourage everyone to be that ripple effect and make a difference in our community because you have a voice to be heard, a kindness to be shared, a contribution to make, and a gift that others need. These are the things that give each of us the ability to make a difference today and every day because you matter. I personally would love to see every school become involved in You Matter Day on some level. And I handed a copy of my card and what I call our bookmark, which is like a summary of what we do, who we are and what we do, and our events are on the back. And as a proud mom, last but not least, Livonia Public Schools can be proud of the fact that SPN Survivors logo, our graphics, our custom designed fabric that we use with our battle buddies and our comfort kits, they were all designed and created by myself and one of your students, my daughter, Natalie Truxel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank both of you and all folks who choose to participate in audience communications, especially when it's done in such a positive way to encourage one another to take what we do and to do it all better. We have a terrific school district. We always have room for improvement, as any organization does, but I thank you for your participation, for your respectful participation, and for your encouragement to take our organization and take it up a step. Thank you. The next item on our agenda this evening is item 2, Committee of the Whole. Item A is the discussion of board meeting schedule for 2017-2018. In our board packets, we had a proposed schedule for our meetings for the upcoming school year. The board members have had a chance to take a look at this. It is largely the same format as it had been in the previous year. A couple tweaks on it that we typically have, the January 16th meeting, which is moved from to a Tuesday because of Martin Luther King Day. A couple of our study sessions / workshops that we incorporated into our typical calendar of the year, putting them right in there so we hopefully don't omit them and let time sneak by on us. Has everyone had a moment to take a look at this? Mrs. Oquist, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
Actually, the 3 things that you mentioned were the 3 things that I had highlighted.
Okay, all right.
So we're thinking along the same lines.
Are there any questions or comments or suggestions for any changes on this? No? Okay. We will, I do not remember if this is a voting item. I don't believe that it is. I think it's a published item once it's agreed upon by board members.
Yes, and we will hold doing that until next week, so if anyone does have any tweaks, we generally follow the same pattern of the study session, committee meeting, board meeting, with the exception of a couple of months where that just doesn't fall correctly because of either a holiday break or a school break, similar to this month, where because of Memorial Day, we have one less Monday, so we have 2 committee meetings as opposed to the study session. But for the most part, it follows that same pattern.
Mrs. Frank?
Are the workshops going to be our board, Wayne Risa work, or is it not necessarily set?
Not necessarily set.
Okay.
Those are put in our schedule intentionally so that the board can take some time to work on board work, on developing our team and strengthening our team. That will be up to the board whether or not we use those for Wayne Risa work or utilize those for other topics that are coming up. And in years past, we've had 3. There's absolutely no reason that we can't. We're putting 2 in, but as need be or as time allows, we can certainly add that 3rd in there. We just put the 2 in to make sure that it doesn't get overlooked. So in answer to your question, maybe not. Okay. So, I mean, we do intend to continue the Wayne Risa work. I'm just not certain whether or not it's going to fall on those given nights.
Okay, perfect.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is item 2B, update on student support plan for 2017-2018, which is so exciting.
It is.
And I will turn it over to Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you so much, President Burton. It absolutely is. We are thrilled to be able to be talking about adding support in for our most at-risk students and support to them as we work to help them be as successful as possible. As we pull this up for you,
Excuse me, Mrs. Oquist,
Yes.
if I could interrupt you for a moment. If any of the members of the audience wish to see the displays, okay.
we put one over here.
I've got one up.
We
Oh,
put another
Never
TV
mind,
over
I
there
didn't see
so
the one
that
over
they
there.
can see it.
I was going to invite you to move your seat if you needed to, but I didn't see the other screen over there.
That's okay.
I apologize, go right ahead.
That's all right, no problem. Thank you for being conscious of that. As you know, we shared with the Board of Education at our study session information about the student support plan. And I believe we took about an hour and a half or so to go through this PowerPoint in great detail. So our intent this evening is to move through it much more quickly, just as a reminder for you and a refresher on the types of rationale for the supports we're recommending. We've been able to gather a good deal of input on this. And so we will not spend as much time. You had some outstanding questions, and I thought we had great dialogue as we talked through some of the data that we shared at our meeting. But really, this is just to, once again, summarize the plan, to let you know where we're headed, and to let you know the few pieces that we'll still be working out specifically as we move through the staffing process. So again, our desire was to develop a plan for student support based on the passage of the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. This really allows us a tremendous opportunity that we have not seen in literally well over a decade to be able to look at what supports we can add for our most at-risk learners in our schools. So the first thing that we did, and you know we talked through this process over a number of months, is work to determine our priorities. And the priorities for these funds and this support plan were multi-tiered. We took a look at our current state of reading achievement in Livonia Public Schools, and we really took a look at our Tier 1 instruction, which is the instruction that all children should be receiving each day, every classroom, every child, every teacher, every day. The implementation of the third grade reading bill. As we know, the legislation that was passed last year will be implemented beginning next year, and Mrs. O'Brien in a moment will be going through those requirements for us. That begins next year. Many of those mandates are not funded, and so we are looking at ways to be able to support the implementation, the expectations of the third grade reading bill. Really the importance of literacy proficiency across all grades and content areas. So while a specific focus for us will be on our students in order to reach proficiency in reading by third grade, we really took a deep look at the impact this has when students are either many grade levels below or even non-readers as they move on through upper elementary school, middle school, or high school. And you will see in just a moment how that impacts their performance in all of the content areas. So literacy was an overarching focus for us in many of these priorities. The next piece talks about the impact of student social emotional needs on learning. As we know, those are prevalent for so many of our children. We also know that in order to be ready to learn and to be as successful as possible as a learner, their social emotional needs need to be met. Finally, the research is abundant. We studied a significant number of research articles as well as our own practices with regard to the impact of poverty and at-risk factors on student learning and school success. Again, there are a number of different components of this. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we move through the presentation. But one of the things we really wanted to do is to be able to target and support and focus intervention on our students who are at risk in one or more of these areas.
So like we just shared in our priorities, here is last year's MSTEP results and our student average, our grade level average compared to the state average. And so although we are at or above the state in every grade level, our scores are not where we want them to be. And so that is one of our reasons for this plan. And then as we look in, we tend to compare our scores ourselves in our Tri-County ranking. And 4 years ago in 2012, those are our rankings in reading for 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and those are our rankings last year. So again, we want to be working on improving our reading for all of our kids. As Superintendent Oquist stated, the state passed the 3rd grade reading bill last fall, and we are going to be beginning to implement that this fall. It will include, beginning with kindergarten, this year's current kindergarten would be the class that would be retained in 3 more years. So we need to begin to establish a systemic plan for testing 3 times a year. Students who are below reading level need to have an individualized reading plan. We need to provide them with daily interventions and help our teachers document the results of those interventions. And so that by 2019-20, we have students who could be retained. And so we want to do everything that we can to make sure that we've done everything that we can in order to support our readers. And again, like Superintendent Oquist said, reading is needed in all areas. These are our MSTEP results for the past 2 years. In social studies is on the left, and science starts in the middle and goes to the right. But again, our students are being required to deeply read and respond and comprehend in their content areas. It's not multiple choice questions. So they're being required to do a lot more with that.
In addition to academics, as you well know, that the social-emotional well-being of our students is of utmost importance. You can see from the statistics on the screen that continued support of students in the area of their social-emotional well-being is important. If students come to school and they do not feel safe, they feel, again, unsafe, that we need to address those needs to the best of our ability so that students can focus and pay attention better in the classroom so that they are prepared to learn. And for some of our students that engage in aggressive type behaviors, they're not in the classroom or they're disruptive to the classroom environment for the other students. So our goal is to also provide social-emotional well-being for our students here in Livonia Public Schools.
This next slide is just a brief summation of quite a bit of information regarding children in poverty. First, the graph or the chart up there is showing the increase for Livonia Public Schools in percentage of poverty. Now, governments have schools measure their poverty rating as the qualification of free or reduced lunches, the percentage of students who qualify for free or reduced lunches. So you can see the increase over the years that we've had in less than a decade. Some of the bullets below just go to the fact of we're aiming to try to increase literacy. There are students coming from poverty and low income that hear millions less words as they're growing up, and vocabulary is the building block for the tool for learning. And that's one big piece, it's actually just one statistic that we're showing as far as the reason why we want to help students in poverty with regard to literacy and specifically the 3rd grade reading bill. Of course, students from low income are much more likely to drop out of high school. We want to be able to support our students and keep them in school where they're safer and their future has a brighter outlook. And the last bullet regarding with that socio-emotional security, where children that live in poverty have much higher stress levels. Their brains are not ready to learn because of the concerns for more of the necessities of life. And if you're not satisfied in the bare minimums, you're concerned about that and not ready to learn when you come to school. So just a brief section on the impact of poverty in children.
At the study session, we spent a lot of time reviewing the past years of budget reductions. And so tonight, just for the essence of time, but yet so that our TV audience will be able to hear what even just some of these budget reductions that were made in direct support for students, I'm just going to read through this list. So kindergarten paraprofessionals were eliminated. We eliminated elementary student assistance providers at the K-4 level, the elimination of full-time learning specialists at the K-4 level, reading recovery program, the reduction of student assistance providers, which we kindly call the SAPs at the secondary level, reduction of or elimination of middle school teaming, classroom teachers, we increased class size. That means that we increased the divisor that we use to calculate the staffing. Reduction of psychologists and social workers, high school transition counselors, and differentiated staffing was also eliminated as the years went by. Student services, instructional paraprofessionals in the resource rooms, textbooks and teaching supplies were reduced, technology paraprofessionals were eliminated, teacher leaders, and elementary clerks. So again, that just kind of lists some of the things that we have had to live without, and that's another reason why tonight is really exciting with the plans that we have coming forward.
Mrs. Scott, you should also be able to say the next slide if you have to remind everyone of all the cuts that our schools and our district have endured over the past 10 years. You should at least get the little Oscar man jumping in the corner there.
That's true. The Debbie Downer part is a little bit much.
So really, so that was a reminder of where we've been over the past 10 years, and the cuts. The first two pages were direct impact to students. The third page were indirect, but really no less impactful cuts to schools and throughout the district. And as you know, that was a direct result of the cuts in school funding over these past number of years, and our need to be as judicious as possible. So the good news is our community has approved this essential request, and we know that the cornerstone of that focused on what we would be able to provide for students as we move forward. So one of the things we've been working on over the past 5 months was looking to create a plan for student support that included differentiated supports that would also impact academic and social emotional outcomes for our students. I'm going to just talk about this very, very briefly because we did talk about it in great length at our study session. But as you may recall, one of the things that we had focused on was the fact that many of these supports would be differentiated based on students in schools of greatest need. The reason being is because although this is a significant sum of money as far as the Wayne County Enhancement Millage, when you take a look at, in total all of those things that we cut, we're really talking about, replacing at this point a relatively small portion of that. And so rather than spreading that out necessarily evenly over every school, what we took a look at was what would differentiated support look like. This was a conversation that our administrators have had with us, that we have certainly had here, and we really wanted to be able to tackle that issue of at-risk and poverty and the impact that has on our students and on our schools. So we conducted a very thorough building level analysis that included information about total student population, the economics of that school and the demographics of that school, the at-risk nature of students at risk for struggling to learn, additional programs that school may have, whether or not they have a high ELL population, whether or not they're designated as a Title I school, whether or not they host one of our special programs. And then additional considerations, whether or not that school was part of a school merger, etc. There were some of those other factors. So we, again, did a deep analysis of our schools and then determined where the greatest need would exist and put forward recommendations that include both differentiated support and support for all of our schools. So this is a reminder, it will certainly look familiar to all of you. It was part of all of the presentations that we did throughout the fall. It was also part of a number of our discussions here as part of our team as we talked about the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. These were the priorities that we had set. Each district has the ability to utilize those funds as determined, as prioritized by their Board of Education. And so there aren't specific focus areas. Many districts had a number of these same pieces, but some had very different pieces as well. As you know, our district has been fortunate enough to have the bond issue. And so the bond issue passed in 2013 has allowed us to have a dedicated funding source to deal with some of the significant renovations and the significant upgrades that we have been able to make, not only in our physical plants, but also related to technology. So as an example, many districts have had to look at utilizing the enhancement millage for those needs because they may not have the sinking fund or the bond fund. So this really allowed us to set these priorities. Hiring and retaining high-quality staff, preserving and enhancing our programs and our offerings for students, maintaining class size and reducing where feasible, supporting struggling learners and students with added needs, and financial stability. As you know, many of those also coincide with economic priorities and priorities in general that our community helped share with us when we did our budget forums in 2015, and many of those match up quite well with each of those. So as we move on to the next one, turn it back over to Mrs. Scott.
Yay, and it's not going to be about budget reductions this time. So this is the elementary level considerations that we have been planning for. Support for all schools, and so we'll start out with that $8,000 for each elementary school and secondary school for teacher stipends for before and after school learning interventions. These stipends would be for small group targeted instruction, and that allows to be able to give some intervention without removing them from the daily instruction, the students. That ends up being translating to about 243 hours of additional support that could be given at each school. 3 FTEs for literacy coaches, one paid out of the 35A grant, then the other 2 being out of the millage. That provides for a job-embedded PD, which we know that is the best kind to have, and teacher effectiveness is vital to increasing our student learning and student success. Paraprofessional kindergarten support, we already have 5 days, not near enough, but 5 days of support that the schools have been able to use. So we are looking at increasing that to 8.5 full days in the fall, which would mean that the first 2 weeks of school they would have full para support for each one of the kindergarten classrooms, and then also in addition to have 10 days that they could use at their discretion, whether or not that was mid-year support or other times that they feel deemed necessary. Then support for schools based on differentiated need. We would have 4.5 FTEs in EST and ESAP roles, our K-4 schools, and in addition to potentially a 5-6 school. Additional FTEs to maintain current class size and lower where it's feasible, and then additional staffing allocation for flexibility in the special schedule. Special schedule has been rather tight over the last few years, so this would allow for some of that flexibility in that.
And just to clarify, that's an additional 4.5
Yes.
FTEs in the EST and ESAP, in addition to what is currently in place.
Correct.
Thank you. For the middle and high schools, we would increase the student assistance provider. Currently, it is 0.75 at the high school, and then that person also spends 25% of their day at their middle school and their triad. It was a full-time position at the high school previously. We would go to restore that, but then also add to the middle school level. So each middle school would have the equivalent of 0.5 SAP, and each high school would be restored to a 1.0 position. Again, if you aren't familiar, the student assistance provider works with some of our most severely at-risk students, either individually or with a team of either counselors, psychologists, social workers, teachers, administrators, and so forth within the building in a position that's proved to be vital in working with this particular population. In addition, we asked each secondary school to put forth a proposal based on an identified amount of staffing in terms of academic supports that they would put in place. And we asked them to identify specifically how they would identify students for these classes or for these interventions, specifically what interventions they would implement and how they would monitor their effectiveness. And what we've seen from this in the proposals is a variety of academic support or double dip classes being offered, many built around iReady or PSAT or SAT prep style work. And also in just reviewing it again recently, these are oftentimes support classes that we can add or that we have currently running at the 9th grade level, but many of the proposals include similar classes at the 10th and even 11th grade level. So again, each building submitted a proposal and we're working through those individually. And then as Mrs. Oquist mentioned earlier, we'll have some staffing designated to be allocated on a differentiated basis so that we can get at some of the critical areas at individual buildings, critical areas beyond school day interventions, math lab, for example, and some things that might fall into the critical areas category could be courses at the transition grades, so in 7th and 9th grade where we typically see our highest degrees of failure. Reduction in some of our lower level courses or reduction in class size and so forth. So again, we'll work individually with the buildings and that staffing will be allocated on a differentiated basis as needed. Then just a few key bullets off this last slide. We would look to make a 3-year commitment. We feel that that commitment over time is necessary in order for these implementations to be impactful. We would work with the schools to develop success criteria so that we know specifically how we'll know whether they're being successful or not. And we would collect relevant data on each of the interventions taking place. And obviously then our central office administration and our building administration and building staff will meet and review that and analyze that data annually, again, to monitor the effectiveness of the interventions and then adjust them accordingly.
So that's a brief overview and a summary of where we are, and we will certainly be working closely with each of our school principals and our teams to put these next steps in place. Again, you saw our targeted priorities. We could probably establish lists that go well beyond this, but we think that we'll be able to make some inroads in some very meaningful ways. Certainly, we hope that we may be able to continue this on beyond that 3-year mark. That was a question that we've had, which is, well, if the enhancement millage is 6 years, why are we saying 3? We want to say, we don't want to commit to less than that, because really to have implementation take hold and to really look to make that meaningful impact and to look at the first 3 years of implementation of the 3rd grade reading bill expectations, we wanted to first look at that 3-year chunk. After which time, we wanted to be able to, again, review the needs as you looked at that matrix. What are those same schools and same students still rising to the top of having the greatest need? What changes what might we need to make in that? And then we'll continue to reevaluate to determine if, based on that success criteria, are those interventions making the difference? Are they making the impact we hope they would? If not, we'll certainly monitor and adjust along the way, and then bring forward perhaps either a continuation of that plan at the end of that period of time, or we may move some things off and look at adding some different interventions. One of the things we'll do is continue to work closely with our academic services department, and then certainly each of our directors of elementary, secondary, and student services to determine if indeed the resources that we're putting forth in our schools and on behalf of our students are making the impact that we hope.
Excellent. Are there questions or comments from the board? I do want to thank a few people. Frequently when there are issues, you hear, especially in the education world, which just kind of gets all of our hair standing up on the back of our necks, is, well, you can't just throw money at a problem. I would like to thank the voters in our community and surrounding communities throughout Wayne County, because by supporting this Wayne County Enhancement Millage, what throwing money at a problem looks like is being able to put professionals in front of students who can reach them in a way that they may not have gotten sitting in a 1 in 25 classroom. There are times when given students, whether they are general education or needing extra supports or gifted students, need something beyond what the first shot can give them. I would like to thank our voters immensely for recognizing that there are needs in education. And most of our budget is spent on salaries and benefits intentionally because we are a people teaching people organization. But thank you to our voters for recognizing that some of these needs have got to have some dollars associated with them so that we can afford to hire people to take care of some of these needs that simply had not been met over the last 8 years or more of budget cuts after cuts after cuts. I'd also like to thank our staff. The board is aware because we've had some deep discussion at our last meeting and now, but our staff worked very, very diligently, many staff members in all of our buildings, at what would be the most meaningful in that specific building. With roughly 23 schools, what works in Building A may not be the highest need in Building B or Building C. So thank you to our staff members and our administration for taking a serious look at what's going to be most effective in your building. We certainly don't want cookie cutter. If we have an opportunity, as you were saying, Mrs. Oquist, to make some really meaningful inroads, I appreciate the staff coming forth with their plans for what would be the most meaningful way to utilize those dollars in their building. Just like our district may have a different need than the districts next door or to the north, south, east, or west. Each school outside of our district may have different needs also. So thank you to our voters and thank you to our staff for taking this seriously enough to actually put some tools in front of our kids starting in the fall that we hadn't had in a long time. Any other comments or questions? Thank you to all of you also for presenting all this information. That concludes item 2, Committee of the Whole. The next item on our agenda is item 3, Building and Site, and I'm going to turn this portion of the meeting over to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Burton. We have a number of items tonight, and Mr. Francis is going to be quite busy. But what we are going to do is move item 3I up, and that will be the first item, and that's the district-wide waste removal bid results, general fund, and Mr. Francis.
Thank you. I wanted to, I appreciate you moving up letter I to the front of Building and Site. The reason we're doing so is I want to invite Mr. Harry Lau, the Administrator of Facilities and Operations, up to the table. During the bid for we have a 3-year contract expiring with our waste and recycling removal. And we put out a bid, as we had let you know in the memos and previously spoke about. One of the responders, I actually am related to. A cousin of mine is the owner of well, actually they're brothers, and for that reason, they actually ended up being the low bid. I was not involved directly with opening the bid or doing the walkthroughs, but just to keep everything, I guess, as clean as possible, I asked Mr. Lau to come tonight to present this item. The day-to-day operations of the waste and recycle removal will be taken care of by Mr. Lau, so I will remove myself from this particular item and let Mr. Lau walk you through it.
Thank you, Mr. Francis.
Good evening, members of the board.
Good evening.
Superintendent Oquist, the LPS administration. As Mr. Francis said, we put out a request for proposal, and 3 bidders came back. The 2 large players in southeastern Michigan did not bid. So Detroit Waste and Recycling actually is a restart up from Capital Waste, which had sold out in 2012 to Waste Management. They had a 25-year run as a successful waste removal business, had several school districts in Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne County. I did go to their yard down on Russell and Milwaukee, which is a very lovely place, and see that they have all new trucks. Actually, they only have 4. Their business started out, how they started back up, is they got into the roll-off containers for construction cleaning mostly, and now they've picked up Livonia Public Schools and Dearborn Schools. So we are their only 2 front end, they call it, when they're dumping in the front end customers at this point, so they're going to concentrate on us. John Francis, one of the owners, guaranteed me that they weren't going to try to grow too large. They wanted to keep a footprint in Wayne County so they could concentrate on the business. So I'm very confident with this company. I did have a long conversation with the business manager from Dearborn, and he said when they were Capital, they did a fine job for them. The core management is still in place from Capital to Detroit. So I don't know if you want to get into the sordid details of why they sold, but one of the partners went through a divorce. The partner that was picking it up decided to be a partner, and they didn't want her to be a partner. So they dissolved. That's the long and short of it.
Questions? Mrs. Bradford?
Did you say Dearborn already uses them, or they're going to start?
They are going to start with us. They are leaving Waste Management as we are leaving Rizzo.
Okay. So they haven't started in Dearborn yet?
They have not.
Okay.
They have not.
So we don't know how successful they've been. Have they ever done a school district before?
Yes, in the past when they were Capital,
Okay.
they had several school districts in the Tri-County area.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? President Burton?
I assume that there's no problem between Detroit Disposal and Waste Management now,
No.
correct? I assume that there's not any conflict between the 2 companies that might muddy our water.
No. My understanding of it is in 2012, they sold to Waste Management, picked up all their old routes, and they were out of the business for close to 5 years.
Okay.
So now they're just restarting back in the market.
Taken free and clear.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr.
Yes.
So this is a 1-year agreement with 2 one-year options. Is that, the options I assume are customers' options, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, that's, it's mutual. If we decide we want to engage in a second year and they don't, then we just do another RFP.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
Mrs. Battlefield?
I'm not that I'm assuming up front that they're not going to do the appropriate job, but are there some, since they are newer in the business as a new company, I know they've been in it for a while, that we're just going to make sure that there's some review and feedback to make sure that everybody's, doing their job, and if we need to make any decisions possibly mid-year, that those opportunities will present themselves.
Correct.
Okay.
All of our RFPs have some out clauses in them.
Okay.
If it's not working well, and unfortunately, I do monitor this very closely because I don't like dumping air in containers. So I often change schedules, particularly going into breaks, and like summer and Easter, I kind of shut down some of the pickups, and so I'm always watching it anyway. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions, comments? Mr. Lau, do you have any idea what our annual cost was with Rizzo for this similar service?
We are currently running about 70,000, and that is with our normal schedule, some extra pickups, and the roll-off container. So we kind of lump them all together. We kind of state it as so much for the building pickup, and then kind of speculate on the roll-off. So there'll be a little uptick in the price of less than 1%. But with construction costs, they usually do about 20 roll-offs a year plus extra pickups depending on the activities at the schools.
Do we have any idea why our current provider didn't bid on this? Any idea?
I didn't contact them, and when I talked with Dearborn, they did not contact Waste Management or Rizzo either. Usually you would call out if you're concerned about bidders coming in. Everybody hears from a bid for Michigan that are associated with these industries, and I really couldn't speculate. Well, I could speculate, but it probably wouldn't be true as to why they did not bid.
Okay. I could speculate too. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, then this will go on the regular agenda.
Yes.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Lau. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, then we'll go back to A.
To A, yes. I'd like to invite Mr. Palterio from Plant Moran Cressa, owner's representative for Livonia Public Schools. This is the opportunity to do the quarterly dashboard report. So Mr. Terrell is going to hand out, or is handing out, a binder for all of you. All of the items A through D are located in the binder, and the first tab should be the quarterly dashboard report. This is going to be January through March 31st, 2017. Even though this is getting into late May, this is the first quarter encompassed. So beyond that, as we go through, like I said, A through D, you'll have the items in that same binder. And I do believe letter D, you already had in your packet previously about the roofing assessment.
Slower.
I was going to start singing.
Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation to be here this evening. I would like to say before I get started, thank you very much for all the thoughts and prayers and well wishes in the last couple of months. It's been a lot of activity going on, and I really do appreciate it. So, as Mr. Francis said, we do have a few things to go over. The first is the dashboard report, which should be in tab A. So you're familiar with the format. This is basically through March 31st as far as the quarter ending. And then we have some additional information in here as well through today's date. Goals and objectives, I think everyone's familiar with the bond project and the impetus for that. In the upper left there. Bottom left, critical project issues. So obviously Stevenson is well under construction and getting near completion, and then Churchill is now underway as well. Those are the two big projects we're working on at the moment. There's quite a bit of material expediting for some of the sinking fund projects going on this summer. We're doing 5 or 6 different parking lots, the water main and homes. We're starting to even design some of the work for next year, or at least start talking about designing the work for next year, as we're trying to figure out which buildings would take priority to do that, the next set of parking lots and traffic studies and stormwater issues and things along those lines. We'll have more to present to the board as we kind of have some of those brainstorming sessions and get a better handle on what we think that next group would be. We'll be getting ready to start some of the sinking fund paving projects for 2017, as well as issuing all the contracts and paperwork. We've got some elementary furniture procurement, which came to the board, I believe, a month or so ago. So that's all been ordered. And then as well, we've got some repainting going on, which I think everyone's familiar with. I think there was a report issued. I don't know if you want me to get into that or not.
You can certainly share briefly an update on, as you know, this was a high priority for us, and that process is underway, but we'll have Mr. Terrell give us an update on that.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time trying to come up with a correct solution, as you'll recall. We actually had NTH come out and do quite a few adhesion tests throughout the district to make sure that we understood why the paint failed. And then we had a couple different paint reps, one from Sherwin-Williams, one from PPG, come out and look at the existing conditions, try some different remediation methods as far as scraping the top layer of paint off, different prepping methods, different priming, different latex, oil-based, epoxy paints. And we did come up with a couple different recommendations from them that were successful and did adhere to the existing paint, which we were happy about. It took a long time to come up with them, but we wanted to make sure that everyone bought in on it, not just the paint reps, but the actual painters themselves, the architects that did the work, NTH, the district, and their maintenance group. So once we got that underway, or got that figured out, we did go back and do work at Cleveland and Coolidge. We did some repainting work over there. We have not heard of any issues since those buildings have been repainted, and we hope not to. Randolph, same thing. We've been out there repainting, and that work was completed in April. Hayes and Roosevelt were completed in April as well, so everything has been good as far as I've heard. And then Kennedy is really the last one. There are some small issues, I believe, at Emerson and at Frost. Pretty minor stuff that needs to be redone. Frost is maybe a little bit more than Emerson, but Kennedy's kind of the big one that everyone's the most familiar with. We've been negotiating with the painter there, trying to agree on what the remediation and what all those steps were that I kind of laid out. Talking about, the cost of the paint, because we're actually looking at doing a much more durable paint than we originally had spec'd, and they're obviously posturing for additional compensation for materials and things like that. So we actually have a proposal in from them that we're going to review tomorrow, and I think we're pretty close to having that resolved. I'm expecting to resolve it tomorrow, and then to get them back out, probably at this point, probably this summer, to have them come out and repaint that building, rather than putting everybody through that, with the last month or so of school. So that's kind of an overview. Again, we did take a long time to do it, but since we didn't do it exactly right the first time, we wanted to make sure we certainly did it right the second time. So
much of this, the discussion was driven by preparation and product. So, and those drove our discussions moving forward with Churchill as well. We spent quite a bit of time, if you recall, we didn't bring the paint bid for Churchill to you on the original packet of bids because we kept continually speaking about, what's the proper preparation, what's the proper item, what are we going to use here. We ran multiple tests at Churchill.
Yeah, we learned our lesson.
Yeah, so.
Yep, we do have a good solution there, so. And going forward for all of the other buildings. Right. So that's it for repainting. So we're getting there. We'll be done this summer. Design work for the fall 2017 projects. That's something we want to talk about tonight as well. And then bid and award for the fall 2018 projects. That's something that we've started some discussions about with French Associates, and then the design work itself. So there's a lot going on in a short window. I hate to say that the next bidding cycle is coming. If we don't get working pretty quick here, it's going to be upon us, and we don't want to be the last ones to bid out. We want to be the first again. So, and that date keeps getting earlier and earlier every year. So we want to make sure we're still first. So we're towards the front. So budget summary-wise, the center top section here, you'll see the original $195 million budget, plus the $5 million from the sinking fund, gets us to $200 million. To date, we've issued POs and contracts to the tune of about $163 million, paid out just under $130 million. We have about 33 left to pay, and then about 37 left to commit. In the center section, you'll see the reconciliation for Series 1. Series 1 has been spent in full and reconciled, which tied out. And then Series 2, we've spent about $17 million out of the 87 for Series 2. So. Three-month look ahead. So we've got Stevenson obviously wrapping up this summer and into September. It'll probably be similar to Franklin, where we'll have construction done by the end of August, but we'll be looking to take September to get everybody trained on how to use the new rigging systems, the sound systems, making sure the acoustics are all tuned, making sure the staff understands the electrical and elevators and lifts and things like that, so. And then Churchill, we started over spring break with some abatement and demolition work. That will continue on through the school year. There'll be a big push this year to get a lot of the demo and the steel done before the kids come back in the fall, to make sure the building's safe and secure. We don't want to be having cranes overhead while people are walking down the corridor. So there'll be a big push this summer to get all that work done, but we're pretty confident that we're ahead of the curve already. Summer and fall 2017 projects, we'll talk about those in a minute here. And then sinking fund projects I mentioned, Buchanan, Churchill, Franklin, Grant, Holmes, Hoover, Randolph. Those are all moving along. We're going to start weekly meetings just to make sure we keep the contractors on task out there. Make sure we have all the permits, right-of-way permits, soil erosion, that kind of thing in hand, so we don't have any hiccups there. But we got some good contractors, and we're excited to get moving on those. Roofing assessments we'll talk about in a minute. And then 2018 projects, those are kind of the last 4 or 5 to kind of wrap up the overall bond program. So not quite wrap it up, but get pretty close. So, any questions at all about the dashboard report? So that's kind of a snapshot.
Thank you on that. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. Take us to 3B. Engineering change for bond work in summer and fall 2017. Is this going to be B in our tab?
I think we actually have them in order this time.
All right.
Mr. Francis gave me a sneak peek of the agenda, so I tried to line them up.
So, that was, in other words, if it's not in order, it was his fault, not mine.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, we have contract recommendation for architectural and engineering services for the summer 2017 projects. That'd be the GSRP wing at Garfield, Buchanan, Randolph, Cooper, and Frost. So there's pretty varying degrees of work at those different buildings. We asked French Associates to kind of take the lead on it. As you know, initially when we passed the bond and went out for architectural services, we had 2 different architects under contract. SHW Group, which was then purchased by Stantec, which, let's just say we had some challenges with that transition. And then French Associates, who's done an outstanding job for the district, including helping us bring Churchill in on budget, which I think I might have been the most excited about, but everybody was excited about that after some of the challenges at the other 2 high schools. Accordingly, we're recommending French Associates be the architect for this summer's construction as well as the fall, which would be the balance of the Garfield building to move the Western Wayne Skill Center over there. So we have 2 different letters. One is for this summer's work, which is $52,500. That's a budget number. They're essentially going to do it hourly, but with a not to exceed of 5.25% of the cost of the work. Their current contract, it varied a little bit. At the elementary schools, it was about 4.4%. At the high school, it was about 6.1 or 6.2%. So we sat down and kind of negotiated with them a little bit. Obviously, the market is pretty hot. People are busy. Times are a little bit better. We felt that we wanted to be within that range of, again, about 4.4 to 6.2 or so. 5.25 is a pretty competitive number. You know, if we were to put this out for bid, we would expect it to be somewhere in that range of 5 to 5.5%. So we thought that was a fair way to do it. If they come in less because they don't spend as much time as they could, then the number will be lower. But we have a cap, so it's kind of like a not to exceed, if you will. So, which I always like. So.
And that was for summer.
That is for the summer work.
Not including Churchill, because remember Churchill was.
That was a separate.
Yep,
that was a separate agreement. And then the second B1 letter here is for the fall work, which would be the balance of Garfield. That would be for $62,500, essentially the same arrangement. It's a not to exceed at an hourly cost with a cap. So. And then behind that, you'll see a letter from French Associates kind of detailing what their rates are, and same thing I just explained. And I think that's it for me. So, Katie Matevska from French is taking the lead on that as well, so pardon me.
Yeah, that was the one thing I wanted to mention is, I think many of you are familiar with Katie. She's certainly been here with her, her design development drawings. And her work with our staff is really impeccable. She works very, very closely not only with our team and with Plant Moran Cressa as our owner's rep, but she is very, very hands-on, and she will often send back, after she meets with the administrator, the secretary, folks who are impacted perhaps by some of these changes, and then will report back to us 3 different options, share the pros and cons. But we find her to be very clear on LPS priorities. She has certainly worked with us for a long period of time now, but she knows what the priorities are, what the scope of our work is and what it is not. But then she also listens intently to make sure that the spaces that we're either redesigning or designing match the needs of that particular school and the staff that it impacts. And so I just wanted to acknowledge the efforts of French and Associates in taking on this additional work. We have some creative needs in some of these schools, certainly as evidenced by moving the Skills Center, for instance, over to Garfield. And I really can't think of anyone better to be leading that work than Katie and French and Associates.
Yeah, they, when we had the issues, they were more than willing to jump in and help, so.
Yeah, she's very good with communication as well, both to our team as well as the building teams, the principals, et cetera. So she's very good at that.
Okay.
And not afraid to come up with 3 or 4 or 5 different design options for us to review with the building staff to figure out what works the best. So.
All right, are we going to do this as one, or is this going to be 2?
They're 2 separate. The recommendation is that it falls below the amount that needs board approval, because one is the summer project and the other is the fall project.
Okay.
We bring that recommendation to you as a change order to the French contract.
All right, so there's nothing to vote on in these?
No.
Right. Okay, good.
I saw him now.
So I just have a question, just a clarifying question, because it's our first time through the process from the beginning. When she meets with the team, who is that? Is that Plant Moran? Is that who is the team?
Well, we have a weekly meeting every Tuesday afternoon, and when we discuss the buildings that she's working on, Paul is there, I am there, Mr. Archibald is there, or Mrs. Scott, or both, if they're discussing elementary and secondary. Mr. Lau, Mr. Roberts, the team members from different groups of companies that are working with us, like SES, AUK. We will have, depending if there's a specific topic, we might call someone and have a conference call all together, but that's essentially the core team is French, AUK, LPS, and Plant Moran.
And then each school has a building-based team. And so as we go into each of those schools, so for instance, the summer of 18 schools, they will be asked, just like all of the other schools, the principal will create a building-based team that normally includes school secretary, building supervisor, teachers, et cetera. They work on not only looking at the design and the drawings, but primarily focus on the finishes, so choosing tiles, choosing colors, et cetera, paint colors, and so on. And so we have our district core team here, and then the members of that team will work hand in hand with the school-based teams.
And depending on what the question might be for the building, then we'll reach out, one of us, whichever makes most sense, will contact the building principal or talk to the office secretaries, or what, it depends on what we're working on.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any more questions on B? Seeing none, we'll move to C, hard construction for summer 2017 bound work.
So, in April, we had brought some budget reallocations to your attention, with a couple buildings that are coming offline, with some of the additional contingency funds we had accrued over the course of the bond. With some of the other changes, we had basically reallocated the remaining funds. One of the things we had set aside a budget for was to go back to some of the buildings from previous summers or previous cycles and looked at some of the things that did not get done that we had maybe been a little too conservative with the budget on. Some work at Cooper and Frost, some of the other buildings that are impacted by some of the students moving around throughout the district. We wanted to make sure that we're prepared for them in the fall. So we really went back and looked at anything and everything from adding additional lockers for students, additional office space for staff, resource rooms, casework, doors, lights, ceilings, just trying to make sure that we're prepared in September when the students and staff come back. So we had set aside a budget of about $1.25 million for that. This is kind of the first swatch of those costs. It's actually probably even the second, because I think we talked about the fire protection system at Grant, which was about a $60,000 ad, which I did not include in this summary, but I will once we get all the final costs in. And then actually, I think we also brought in April the CM costs. We were planning on using AUK to be the construction manager for that. So we had some of their costs, but we don't have them all until we know what the final hard construction is. But this is the first piece of the hard construction portion of that work. So we basically challenged French to walk all the buildings with us again, talk through, any other scope that we may not have thought of, which Katie's great at doing. How is the building going to function with additional students? We actually had NTH looking at parking lot issues, bus drop-off, parent drop-off, traffic flow, really tried to look at everything we could think of. And this is the interior renovation portion of that work. So again, it's, C1 kind of recaps it. It's about $305,000. It is not all of the work, but it is a pretty good portion of it. If you flip to C2, that kind of gives you just a snapshot of this piece only against that $1.25 million budget. And then C3 is a letter with some backup on C4 from AUK. So you'll see.
That gives you a better, C4 gives you a better.
Yep, C4 kind of gives you some of the details. So you'll see we've got some demolition at Garfield. The first box at the top is Garfield. We've got a little bit of demolition, some drywall and acoustical work, some glazing, which could be doors and glass, some carpentry work, which is probably some case work and installing some of the doors and things, painting, masonry, some mechanical work, some electrical work.
And this is for GSRP, because this
Yeah,
is,
this
the
is-
you remember we split Garfield into the summer and the fall.
Yep, so this is most of the work in GSRP to get it ready. There is some work that it didn't make sense to do this summer, that it makes sense to do when we renovate the rest of the building, because we can come in on second shift and replace the lights, do some of the mechanical work, do some of the other finishes in the evening, and no one will even know that we're there, and we can get a little bit better price. These, essentially, what we're doing is using existing contractors that we have existing contracts with throughout the district. If you think about the hundreds and hundreds of contractors that we've had throughout the bond project, take lockers, for instance. There's only 2 locker manufacturers out there. We have them both under contract between all the different projects we're doing. We have unit pricing from them. So rather than going out and putting something on the street, we just sat down with them and asked both of them for proposals, took the best proposal, and that's who we hired. Same thing essentially with casework and with painting and some of the other scope. So we've reached out with AUK to the Churchill or the Stevenson contractors that we have currently under contract, and we're essentially going to write a change order to them to do this work. For the most part, the dollar amounts are pretty small as well, so it's really just a timing thing as far as, how fast can we get bodies out there to do the work this summer via change order. So that's kind of the scope at Garfield. At Randolph, it's similar, doors, carpet, windows. Excuse me. The 2 bigger numbers at Randolph are to partially enclose the media center. I want to say it's I'm going to mess it up. Is it the south end?
No, the west side.
The west side, sorry. The west side of the media center. Yeah, you're right. It is. The west side of the media center, we're going to partially enclose that with a partial height drywall metal stud wall, and then further partially enclose it with some glazing and hollow metal framing to try to make that space more functional. We won't be completely enclosed. That would be a little bit more complicated, but if we're going to try to partition it off so they can bring classrooms in there, use it as a resource room, use it as a lab space.
Yeah, it gives a little bit more semi-privacy, because if you think of how it's a wide open media center, and I know many of the teachers were actually quite pleased that we were giving it the semicircle, but still that you could have a sight line, because it's going to be, I think, a 4-foot drywall and then glass. So what that could provide is an area for Chromebook use. So they laid out on the tables. It could provide an area for parent meetings or little community events. It could provide an area for interventions. When it's wide open, the noise levels and the people walking by is a little different, but once it becomes semi-enclosed, it gets a little bit more functionality, and Randolph staff really welcomed that piece of it. Part of this also was the loft they have in the LMC. We're going to enclose that as well so that they could do some small group instruction and interventions in a private setting versus, again, the way the loft, if you're familiar with the Randolph loft, it's just wide open. And it's more difficult to sit and do LLI, reading intervention, when it's open and noisy. So.
We're also looking at doing some work in the old computer lab, kind of bringing that thing up to the current level of the rest of the building. And then they still have the whole east side of the media center, which is essentially going to
remain open
and remain as is. So,
and we tried to do our very best with regard to the west side of it, and not continually adding scope to it. For example, could we have gone ahead and done carpets and HVAC and ceilings? And we weren't doing that. We did it in such a way that it was enough to accomplish what we were looking to do with it, becoming functional without going over the top in one section of the library.
So that's kind of a summary of Randolph. Buchanan, we're really looking at just adding lockers over there. And then Cooper as well. There's probably a little bit, there is some more additional scope at Cooper that we're still working on pricing for, but at this time we just have the lockers. Those are the long lead times that we need to make sure we get ordered. So, and then we will be coming back in June with kind of the balance of the summer work. I think we'll be well within that budget, but I don't have the final numbers yet. We're still working on putting them together. So.
And so just a reminder, if you ever want to look back, I believe my update from 3 weeks ago included a very detailed memo from Mr. Francis that listed all of the projects in the summer with extreme detail about what would be taking place at each of those schools. And so as we bring these pieces forward to you, some of these will be familiar, but if you ever, I can always resend that, but it was also included just with, again, very detailed descriptions so that you were aware of the specific projects we were highlighting at each of those schools for this summer.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, do we need?
For the voting meeting?
Yeah, we need this on the regular.
For the hard construction, yes.
For the hard construction.
Yeah, again, this is again for transparency's sake, none of these individual items is over $100,000, but collectively they are, so we thought we'd bring them to the board.
Right, okay, we appreciate that. Okay, then we'll go to 3D, contract for district-wide roofing assessment project.
Right, and this is your last section, and it is under letter D, but you also have this in your board packet.
Yeah, so this is something we've been talking about for a couple of years. You may remember when the board engaged us to do a facility assessment of the district. One of the big things that came out of that is the need to replace all the roofs in the district. And with nearly 3 million square feet of roofing times $8 to $10 a foot, you're talking $25 to $30 million in roofs that need to be replaced over the next, let's say, 5 to 7 years, or probably 3 to 7 years, I would say. So the next logical step there was to hire a roofing consultant to come in and do a facility-wide study, a little bit more in-depth. We walked a lot of the roofs and looked at the condition and dug through a lot of your files trying to figure out when the warranties expired and what types of roofs they were. This would be to do a much more in-depth study, actually drill holes in the roof to figure out, is there one roof or two? How much insulation do we have? How old is the membrane? How do the seams look? How is the UV degradation of the system, flashing details, siding terminations, all kinds of things that only a roofing consultant can really get into. Gets way over my pay grade as far as that goes, or level of expertise. So we actually put out a proposal. It's a professional service. We didn't have to publicly bid it out per se, but we did put out an RFP to a select list of 5 vendors that specialize in this area in roofing. consulting, and we actually got 4 proposals back. You'll see if you flip to D3. There is no D2, there's just the letter and then D3. We didn't necessarily have a budget in mind. Well, we had an idea of where we thought the budget would come in, but we didn't necessarily have a separate budget for this, so rather than make them up, I just skipped that part. But we were expecting it to come in somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000. That's based on some work we've done in other districts of comparable size of where these costs have come in at. You'll see we got 4 proposals, one from Builders Technology Associates, one from Roofing Technology Associates, one from Structure Tech, and one from Spalding de Decker. So we actually interviewed all 4 firms. We had a couple people, I believe Harry and Wayne were there. So I don't remember if you were there or not, but Scott and I were both there as well. We are very familiar with Roofing Technology Associates and Structure Tech as it relates to this type of work. I've worked with both of them extensively. Spalding de Decker is probably known more for civil engineering work. They've just recently got into the roofing consulting business. And then Builders Technology Associates is a firm that we had not worked with before, but we had kind of heard about. So we had reached out to them as well, and they're a local firm. After interviewing them, we were all pretty unanimous that we thought RTA, Roofing Technology Associates, made the most sense. There's a few reasons for that. One is they're actually local. They're inside the district boundaries in Livonia, which we like. 2, they're actually working for us right now at Franklin and at Stevenson. They did the roof consulting work at those buildings to make sure that the roofs got installed the way they were supposed to, and I can tell you they are extremely thorough, to the point where there was some ice buildup and snow buildup on the roof last year, and the contractor was trying to do some things that they weren't happy with, and they stopped them immediately, called us and said, hey, do you want this done the right way or the wrong way? And we said the right way, and they took care of it. There was another time when somebody was driving they actually drive 4-wheelers up on the roof to put all the rocks and move all the rocks around. And so they said, okay, I want to see tire pressures, weight, and I want to make sure you're not crushing the insulation. So they are top-notch as far as that kind of stuff goes. We've also done a lot of work with them. I've done work with them for other municipalities, other school districts, so we have a pretty good rapport with them, and we know they know how we operate and vice versa. Structure Tech has done some work for us as well. They've done some of the coring that we've done in order to do the architectural design. They interviewed well also, but Roofing Technology, I just think, holistically, it made a lot of sense to use them when you compared all the different proposals, apples to apples, in the interview process. And the teams, people we interviewed from RTA have been doing nothing but roofing for about the last 20, 25 years. So it just makes sense, I think, from all the different angles that we looked at it, to recommend them. So.
And I pointed out in the memo that you received that it wasn't the lowest number, but it was the most responsible that we had.
Yeah, it's for those of you that haven't been here on the board the whole time. When we put out a professional services RFP, we very rarely recommend the low price firm, because we're not necessarily looking for the lowest price. We're looking for the most qualified firm with the best staff at the best value. And that very rarely is the low-cost provider. So I would say that's the case here as well.
Okay. Any questions? Comments? Okay. Do we need this on?
Well, you don't have to, but
Okay.
we brought it as a consultation piece. We're recommending that you don't need to, but if the board wishes to, they can. So, but we're recommending that it's not needed. It's professional service, and it was bid out despite not being a professional service.
Anyone with a strong feeling that we need to put it on?
Strong one way or the other.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay.
All right, very good.
I would say in this case, as in all cases, but in this case, it was a very thorough process, again, not only with the bids, but with the interviews and our familiarity with these groups. And you saw quite a wide range with regard to the proposals. And so we appreciate Plant Moran taking that time for due diligence. This will be really important information for us as we move forward. As you know, part of the long-term facilities plan that was established along with Plant Moran Cross in December of 2015 is really giving us our blueprint for moving forward. And we know this is really one of the largest scope of projects that will be included in that 10-year plan. And so I anticipate not only as we continue to move forward in the next couple of years, but at the point in time which we'll need to look to renew the sinking fund, information like this will be essential to be able to share with our community. And as you see on that final page, you see all of the schools that will be reviewed. We will have, again, as Mr. Terrell shared, very detailed information about the life left in each of our roofs, and then a priority plan for moving forward. And so we certainly think that this is going to be money well spent and will give us some essential information, again, as we move forward on probably the largest project that we'll look at over time with regard to our sinking fund.
The last thing I neglected to mention, thank you for reminding me, is that this assessment will be done over the summer. With drilling holes in the roof and things like that, it's best when there's no one around. And then we should have a final written report from them to present in September. So
They're going to plug those holes.
Yes, they are. If they don't, Mr. Lau will be calling me.
Okay. Well, hopefully the report doesn't come back with, you have holes all over your roof.
There's a hole in every single roof. Yeah.
Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you. On this, I shouldn't assume anything, but have the roofs have already been repaired in the years past? There'll be an order of,
That's what the assessment's for.
yeah, that's what they'll do, they'll order
Yep.
everything and
Yeah.
then.
Essentially, yep, they give it all a
I
rating.
mean, some
on-
of these roofs have already been
Yes.
redone, obviously.
Yes.
And some in
Okay.
spots, some are repaired in spots, and those repairs may not be as, holding up as long as other portions. I mean, it's going to be, I think,
An interesting.
it's going to be a varied
If you look at
report.
the years that the buildings were built, typically back then they would have done like an asphalt built-up roof, which would have lasted about 30 years.
Okay.
And then they probably went over the top of it with a white membrane roof, which lasts about 20.
Okay.
So 50 to 55 years is probably where you guys are at. The problem is now you can't put a third roof on, it's against the building code, so we have to take both those roofs off, figure out how to build it back up with insulation, deal with the roof curves and the vents and the drains and the flashing and things, and then put a new system on. And one of the questions we talked about is, do we want to put a white PVC membrane on? Those are great if you have a lot of cooling days, which we don't have, nor do we have air conditioning in the whole building, or do we want to go back in with a black rubber membrane, which is better in the winter? So there's going to be a lot of life cycle cost analysis, and do you get a 20-year roof or a 25? How is it fastened? So there's a lot of information we're going to have to digest in that report.
Fasten your seatbelts,
Not-
that's
yeah,
going to be a good.
Very exciting meeting.
Not to overstate it, but just to reiterate what Mrs. Oquist said, this is the next big thing.
Mr. Centers.
Just, in case, for the public, if they're wondering, can you just quickly address why this is not coming out of the bond project and why we're doing this through the sinking fund, just to refresh everybody's memory?
Sure. So the scope of the bond project was mostly building renovations at the existing buildings. There was a little bit of site work in respects to the three high schools where the new, or I guess more of the two high schools, Franklin and Stevenson, where the new additions were sitting. But there really wasn't a lot of site work or roofing work unless it was part of those new auditorium additions or adjacent to it. So I think if you went way back to 2006, 2007, when the initial assessment was done, I think there was something on the order of $260 or $300 million worth of need. The district decided to pass a bond for $195, and thankfully the community supported it. When we did our assessment back in December of 2015, in addition to the bond scope, we came up with about $114 million, I believe was the number, over the next 10 years to go back and do all the things that were not in the bond, the roofs, the parking lots, the media centers, kitchens, mechanical equipment, boilers, and outdoors, athletic fields. So there's a lot of other scope. We've been trying to bite off some of that with the current sinking fund, but the sinking fund is not large enough to address all of that scope over the next 10 years. So I've been trying to think strategically about what makes sense to tackle with the remaining bond funds we have, with the sinking fund dollars we have, knowing that that's expiring in a few years, and then what is the plan going forward to address all the district's facility needs. So we can get a lot of it done, but we cannot get it all done with the dollars we currently have allocated. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Mr. Centers.
Great question.
We have some on D4, there's a list of our buildings, and there are some buildings that are not listed that we have renters in.
Right.
Is there any consideration at looking at the condition of those roofs? Or are we just going to ignore them?
Well, we're not going to ignore them to the point of, they're not on the list, but we can, with obviously a slight increase to their proposal, ask them to look at those if need be. But right now, we were focusing on this particular list of buildings, and there's just a handful. You're right, there's just a small handful that aren't on that list. But it was not that we forgot about them or we're trying to ignore them, but we put together that proposal, and I think if we really wanted to have another one or two assessed, we could, but we would have to obviously take the change with that cost.
And just to add on to Mr. Francis, we certainly did talk about a few of those other locations. One of the things that we thought is when this report is complete, this will represent our schools and facilities that will currently be in use by our pre-K post-secondary programs. So therefore, when we have a total dollar amount, that will be reflective of, to share either with the community or as we discuss that with the board. It would not be a large dollar amount to add those on, and we may do that in the fall once we have a look at our current facilities. We talked about adding them now, but we really decided to keep the scope to our current use for LPS pre-K post-secondary, and then we can certainly add those on either depending on lessees or continued use, and that would be those areas we'd have to think long and hard because the investment would be significant about where and when we would be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. But also, if we were not willing to make the investment, kind of gives us an idea of how much useful life is left in that building.
Exactly,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Essentially, with the number and percentage of buildings that we're going to get assessed, we should have a pretty good sense of, as a whole, how the roofs across the district are performing, and probably could have a pretty good estimation of those last few.
From everything we've found to date, they're all of the same vintage. They're all put in the same 3 or 4 year period. So we're not expecting that they'd be anything different. So.
Okay. President Burton.
As a follow-up to Mrs. Bonfield's question, if I remember correctly, roofs are not included in the language of the bond. Is that correct?
That's a great question.
I'm pretty sure that they're not, which is one of the reasons that we can't use bond dollars for our roofs, which is the reason that we're looking at sinking fund dollars.
I would have to go back and double check that, to be honest with you. I don't want to misspeak.
Okay.
That's something I can look into and get back to you on.
I'm pretty sure that, I'm 98% sure.
We'll definitely take a look at that and put in the update.
case.
So it's certainly an allowable bondable expense unless it was not included in our language.
Correct.
And so I think that's what you're referring to.
And either way,
Yeah.
our bond dollars are spoken for with other bond
Correct.
projects.
Correct.
Yes.
But it's one of the reasons that we're using sinking fund dollars for
Yes.
those
Correct.
projects.
Okay,
Anything else?
I think we're good. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Terrio.
It's
It
great
was
to be back.
certainly good to see you
Thank you,
here.
welcome back.
I missed you guys.
Yeah.
We missed you
Miss
too. Okay, Mr. Francis, that will take us to 3E.
3E, proposal to relocate the IT head-end room. I'd like to invite Mr. Tim Clan, the Administrator of Instructional and Information Technology for Livonia Public Schools. We have a few items, E through G, that have to do with information technology. And the first one is this proposal to relocate the IT head-end room. That's essentially the data center. You have a letter that, my memo was a brief, but there's a more detailed letter with background from Mr. Matt Lindner from Plant Moran, CRESA, and he was describing to you, so you got a little bit of a flavor and a little background. But if I could just summarize very quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Clan, and I'm sure that you'll have some questions. But right now, we're in the basement of this building. This is also where our data center, the head-end room, is located. And that was put in, I don't even know when, that was the original location for it. It was larger at the time, the equipment was larger. As we know, technology shrinks. So we had a room set up years ago. It is below grade, which means that if there is a flood from natural causes, our district's data brain and its backup are both below grade. Something that I learned after that, because it wasn't difficult to figure out that it was below grade, was that there's actually a 10-inch pipe?
8-inch.
8-inch pipe running through that room as well. So that one scares me more than even just natural reasons. If that pipe would to be faulty, it would fill that room. There is, did we ever get an estimate? I know we were talking millions, but there's...
Yeah, I mean, we're estimating around 1.5 plus million.
In that room.
In equipment alone in the room, not to mention the data and lost time.
The district would be down not for a day or two.
Few weeks.
It'd be weeks.
Not over a month.
Yeah. So with that happy opening, I'm going to turn it over to...
One question, how soon can we do it?
Yeah, right. So it's something that has been discussed for a while, and I guess one of the pieces is, while we're not trying to renovate this building with bond dollars in any way, shape, or form, we are proposing to move forward on this plan using the technology bond dollars because it's a technological purpose for the district.
And a protection of
And
the
a protection,
technology
and a protection
investment
of the
made
money,
with the
yes, exactly, it's perfect, thank you for that statement, because that's a perfect way of saying it. It's an investment and of protection in what we've already purchased and moving forward. So, essentially, we want to move it, we've had some due diligence, we've had Plant Moran working with our IT department and also working with Barton Mallow. And they have looked at the building, where's the best place. We looked off-site. Off-site is actually more costly to house that. In this building, we could go up to the second floor. And we have a room that we would like to use that's been designated as the best room to use. It's got a structural component to it being on the inside portion of the second floor. It still needs construction done to that room to appropriately protect that data center. But moving all the lines upward as well, that's where the costs come from. So as you saw in Mr. Lidner's letter, the approximate front cost, a budget for it is about $300,000. In reality, I think he originally came in with a $250 to $325, but he landed as a singular budget number at $300,000 to make that move. But if you're looking at $300,000 in future protection for $1.5 million worth of equipment, it starts to make a little bit more sense. I want to let you talk to any of the pieces that I may have missed or fill in the gaps.
Yeah, so obviously, as Phil was mentioning, it's where the majority of our district's equipment is housed that we use to feed all the other buildings in the district. We do have a backup, a data backup off-site, which is actually at Franklin High School in one of the closets. So there's some additional systems there that are backing up the data from this system, but that's not a backup of the system. So if this system were to go down, we can't just flip the switch and have that one start feeding information out to the district. It's strictly a data backup.
It's just so we don't lose all of that.
Right, so if something were to happen here and we lost all our equipment, when we replaced all that equipment, we could restore that data back to it if the equipment was damaged to the point where we lost everything off of it. So when Phil had asked me to, what were we looking about as far as the dollar amount that's included in that closet, it quickly brought our discussion downstairs to, that's obviously a large number and would be a really major loss. But the biggest component to that isn't the money, even though that's a large dollar amount. It's the amount of time that we would be down in the district and the amount of programs that would be affected. So we have roughly 50 servers running virtual and real, so to speak, in that closet there. So that's everything from, heating and ventilation control systems to the phone systems to PA systems to individual programs that we house for buildings for different things they use with their students. So you stop and think for a minute about all of that information. It's not just, hey, we won't have access to the internet if something happens. It's significantly larger than that into almost all the programs that are associated with the district and phones and PAs and everything as well would be directly affected. So, and you can imagine with that much equipment and that much complexity to that system, how long it would take to get that equipment replaced if we were to have an issue. And according to our operations people, that 8-inch water main, if that were to fail down here, it would fill this basement in really short order to a fairly high level too. So that's also one of the things that made us realize how important it was to look at doing this. So.
Not that we're saying the piping is faulty in any way.
No.
We're just trying to be proactive.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions? Yes, Mrs. Frank.
I have a question, but I support moving the equipment. But what is our long-term plan for this building? I guess if we're having construction come in and we're having people here, we utilize some of the construction and repurpose some people and save some costs. I understand that we don't have enough bond dollars to do all that we want to do, and there's a lot of needs in the district, but this building seems like it has a lot of needs too. And I just don't know, is there anything that we could do while we have some of these contractors in here that would make the building more efficient and more useful to our staff that is housed here? And maybe there is a long-term plan or a long-term, but as we piecemeal things, I'm just wondering, I know that there was some construction in the basement and in Stacy's room and an office and that sort of thing. Is there anything that we could do while we have people here that would make it more efficient and combine resources at that time? I don't know if that's a question for
I'm going to defer. I'm actually going to
defer
defer to Mrs. Oquist because that is a long-term facility question that I don't want to step on any toes.
And maybe you've already discussed it as a board before, Karen and I.
I don't know that we've discussed it recently, and so certainly it was also a question that President Burton had, which is, do we foresee remaining in this location? What I can say is that we have always made, this facility on the lowest priority in the district because, of course, our focus is on, our pre-K, post-secondary programs in our schools, and then our other facilities that house the folks who service those schools. So we've done only absolutely necessary repairs here. One example recently was the windows. So as we know, those were original construction. We had a situation where we actually had 2 of the second-story windows actually spontaneously combust and fall out. We also had a significant lack of energy efficiency and also had no egress windows on the first floor. So we were able to tackle that as part of our sinking fund work. Again, we've always been very judicious about any work here at this particular facility. And so we've really stuck with only absolutely necessary repairs. We would consider this one of them. This is something our folks have recommended for the past number of months that we bring forward, and it is a significant dollar amount, but certainly we think worth the investment. At this point, I certainly don't see us moving to a different facility, having to either renovate a facility to house everyone in all of the departments that are housed here and to create a new boardroom, et cetera. We don't have that space currently in any one of our schools that are in use, and to renovate a school that is not in use, to me would not be the highest priority. And so we'll continue to look at small projects here. We certainly know that there are some needs that exist as far as bathrooms and some plumbing needs and so on. I see lots of heads nodding, including from cabinet. And our staff who are here every day would agree with some of that. So I appreciate the question very much. But we'll continue to tackle those on a sinking fund basis as those needs arise. But we'll probably take a more serious look at that once we've completed the work out in our schools.
And I'd like to circle back to say that this particular proposal, I don't view as, it literally would be construction in this building, but I view it as an upgrade and a protection for the district, because it's not just this building that would go down. It would be everybody in the district in all facilities.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
I'm assuming that the room that the computer system is in now is probably the original site from when we started with computers and needed.
The proposed room is actually our smallest conference room.
No, but
No,
she's
the
asking
original-
for-
Oh,
original
right, right,
room
oh, okay.
downstairs
Oh,
that
my
we didn't
apologies.
necessarily,
Yeah.
5 years ago, choose to put
Right.
the computers below grade level.
No.
That this
It-
has
Right.
been the original
Yeah.
building when it was sort of a, wow, this is kind of a cool thing, we need somewhere to stick it, and.
It started with phones,
Yeah.
right? So you had the phone blocks and
Yes.
the phone system and the electrical and everything, and that was always in the basement or in a kind of out-of-the-way space. And since that's where all that equipment was and the wiring that came in for it, it just kind of expanded from there.
And so it's sort of a result of, this is where it's always
Right,
been.
right.
I'm assuming when we move this, that there's gonna be, I've seen pictures of the closets before where, it's been 20 years and all the wires are doing this and, there's stuff hanging that doesn't need to be there. I'm assuming that when we do that, that's gonna, we're gonna be able to clean a lot of that stuff up and stuff that just over time has gotten away from us. I'm also assuming that we're gonna update the electric, the ventilation systems and make that more appropriate for computer systems of today rather than, I assume it was probably a little add-on here and there as time went on, and so.
But just for that room, we wouldn't be
No,
doing this whole building.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry,
Yes.
I don't mean
The
to
scope would be just
propose
that room.
otherwise, yes, but for that.
I wouldn't be mad at you if you did, but.
I know, but I'm just, I'm
Right.
visualizing that, there's been, a whole, certain
Years of.
years of kind of, I don't want to say lick 'em, stick 'em, because I know the district always does what they can, the best that they can with what's possible, but if it's been there for 20 or 30 years, obviously, there needs some updates, and probably there are some safety hazards that are gonna surface as that goes with, different electrical situations. I'm assuming that there's gonna be some there'll be some updated fire suppression in there so that, that we can, better handle that. And in the end, I'm assuming that there's gonna be some added efficiencies just with the workspace and making sure everything's in there. Any maintenance that needs to be done is gonna be more accessible, cleaner, and a lot safer.
Yes, absolutely. It's a smaller space, so there's gonna be some efficiencies gained in the air conditioning and that type of stuff and the amount of power used. We're talking about replacing the APC units, the backup power units, so we can be a little more efficient in sizing them now more appropriately for the equipment that we have currently. Because if that's oversized, you waste a lot of energy keeping that backup system up to snuff when you don't really need it, because we do have a backup generator. It only has to run for a limited period of time. And obviously, the maintenance on that equipment is more expensive if it's over spec for the space. We've looked at, and part of that cost is for a fire suppression system, which I don't believe we have now, other than, I think, sprinkler heads that were in there, which don't work well with electronics typically. You might as well let it burn at that point. And then there's also the updated air conditioning systems for it and ventilation systems that include, if there's smoke or things in the building, or if it senses smoke in that room, it'll shut down the ventilation system so that it's not, feeding.
The whole building.
Yeah.
So along with efficiencies, there's also gonna be additional safety features in there
Yes.
for the equipment and for the personnel in the building.
Yes, and I'd be more than happy to take you at any time and show the board the existing room, which is not perfect, but it's in pretty good shape as far as the way things are laid out. There's just a lot of empty cabinets and things like that now, that as we've been able to condense our equipment down into smaller and smaller packages, that just some open space that's remaining in there, so.
That'll be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
What we've got is a pretty good precursor and some months-long research of what it would take to do, what would be the right way to put it together, so to speak. What we're asking the board is, would you like us to move forward to actually bid this out and get hard numbers? And that would actually occur in the fall, where we would bid, at the same time that we're bidding like the Garfield project, et cetera, we would put the bid out for the fall, be the plan, and have the work done at end of calendar year 17. So,
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
I have a couple questions. The current backup system and the regular system are both located in the basement here, correct? That's the system and there's a backup, you said?
The backup is at
Said
Frank.
Frank.
The backup, the data backup is at
But the
Frank.
system backup is here, is
There,
that correct? Or is
well,
it-
there is no system
There is no
backup.
system
That's
backup.
not-
No, that was
The
the power,
system is
the
here.
power
Yes,
backup.
the
When I said backup, it
Yeah.
was the power
The
backup,
power
Yeah.
backup, okay,
which doesn't do well with water either.
right,
So-
okay.
Those are the APC units?
Yes, so basically those continue to run the equipment until the generator has time to spin up to speed and start generating the power, and then it cuts it over to the generator if the power to go or to go out.
Okay, that answers my
I
question.
apologize, I did just say backup, which is, there's like 4 different backups we discussed, sorry.
Mrs. Bonnefield? Oh, Mr. Centers still has.
It- I think that covers it, go ahead.
Okay, and I'm no computer expert, but, you know, I've heard, mirror drives and stuff like that. Is there, when we move it, are we going to have a capability of a system backup where we can just flip that switch if we have, or that's a whole separate gig?
Well, this would, obviously, we'd be moving, we would be prepping the new room as far as the equipment, the racks, the wiring and everything. When it comes time to physically move the equipment, obviously, there would be an outage at that time.
Yeah.
But it literally would be, unracking the equipment down here, moving it up.
She's saying, can we do an actual backup?
Is there, no,
Or
is
no?
there, so we're talking about.
She's talking about a redundancy.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
an actual,
Where if the current system went down, there would be some sort of a mirror drive or
I
redundancy
see what
where.
you're saying. So there's obviously redundancy is something we would love to have, but it can be extremely expensive.
Okay,
because
that was my
you're
question.
looking at basically a second set
system.
of
Yes.
all
Sure.
the equipment to be able to run it. Doing the data backup, we actually utilized some of the equipment that we removed when we replaced our servers and used that to create our data
Okay.
backup off-site. But when you start talking about redundant, everything being redundant,
Okay.
it can, essentially you're looking at
Double the-
almost doubling what you
Okay.
have, depending on where you determine the point of failure would be
Okay.
in the
Yeah,
equipment,
that,
so.
that answers my question.
We are, and to go a little further, we are looking at the possibility of doing some redundancy in the network and the fiber
Okay.
itself, because right now, the way the fiber is routed around the district, there's some
Squirrels.
connections we could make. Yeah, there's always squirrels. There's some connections we could make out there that would help us if there were a squirrel chew or some other issue with the line to route data a
Right,
different direction
we've talked about
past
that, yeah,
that, so,
okay.
yeah.
I think at your last IT update, we had a conversation
remember,
of,
yeah.
part of the
We
plan
were-
would be to build in some redundancies into the fibers, but
Yeah.
the whole data system,
Okay.
you're putting the kid in the candy store if you start talking about.
In the interim, we've just hired squirrel hunters.
Squirrel, exactly. And we did just have another
all-
squirrel,
We did.
another
Just
squirrel
one day.
chew just last week or the week
Sure.
before, where it was almost an entire day. One of the buildings was down. They had to replace just about a half mile of fiber. And I saw pictures of the chews up there, and they really went to town. And then when they found where they had actually chewed through, they started inspecting line in different directions, and they found multiple other chews along that path that hadn't made it through into the fiber yet, but were pretty extensive. So we replaced that section of fiber with armored cable, which prevents them from chewing it.
And then they wrapped it in peanut butter.
Those at the high voltage.
We'll line up at Myers to get our small game license.
Mr. Johnson, I just have a question.
Go ahead.
Can this be done over a weekend? It's going to be done during the school year, or will it be done over Christmas vacation, or it can be done without?
Well, I think the construction and the prep work for the room obviously can be done at any time without affecting the current network or being up or down. We would just have to time, depending on how long that construction's gonna take place, we would just wanna time that move, for a weekend and evening. I'm assuming probably a weekend to be safe, or a longer break if we have one around that time.
But the plan would be to do the construction portion of it through the fall into the end of calendar 17, and when it would be done. Yeah, we wouldn't want to do it when anybody's in session.
Yes.
Okay, so do we have consensus consensus on moving forward on this?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
go
Thank
for
you.
it.
No,
No, we don't, nothing at this point.
we just wanted your
Just
guidance,
moving
whether
forward.
we
We're
should
just
keep
gonna go
going.
out to quote.
We'll go out and get the bids and we'll bring it back
Great.
in the fall.
Great.
Go for it.
Okay, then we'll go to F.
Letter F, the renewal of Microsoft EES licensing. The quick summation here is that we've had a three-year contract with the Microsoft Office. It is time to renew that. I want to just take a moment to explain the two different quotes that were in your packet, the reason for that. I did a little explanation in the memo, but as you can see, there's a price in Mr. Clan's memo that we went down about $1,000 from 81 and change to 80,000 and some change annually for Microsoft licenses district-wide. They don't do it on a computer-by-computer basis as if we do in our homes when you go buy a license for your home. It's based upon employee count, and they have ranges of that. So we have a price based upon the size of our workforce that would be using office license. So that license that we currently have actually ended in April. They're not flipping the switch off. We continue to use it. It's completely fine. They said, we understand what you're doing. We're good with it. Continue going. But what we'd like to do in conjunction with the finance office is to get this contract on the fiscal calendar. Because right now, if we were to renew May, June of 17, and then 10 months into 18, and then we'd be renewing again in May, June of 18. So what we've asked for on that second quote is a proration for 14 months. So we want to pay and renew, May, June, all the way through to June 30th of 18. And then we'll renew the next two at the lower rate of the 80,000 and change. So that's my spiel, just to make sure it was clear of why there were two quotes in there.
And just for clarification, Phil mentions Microsoft Office, but it's not just Microsoft Office. It's Microsoft Windows. It's all our Microsoft Server products that we use. And essentially, they bill us, in a nutshell, they bill us per student or based on an FTE count. And we basically get unlimited licenses for any of the Microsoft products that we need to use on our servers or on any of our desktop machines in the district. So we know that everything can be on the same version, up to date. It doesn't matter what it originally came with. We can image everything with the same systems.
This was through, once you talk about the pricing, the background on that.
Yeah, so when I started here, we had I think the board had just voted for this 3-year contract at that point to switch over to this. And it was through REMC, the REMC pricing on that, and Microsoft gives special pricing for larger agencies, such as ours, and they did that for the REMC bid as well. So there's, that they're very kind of like Apple. There's not a lot of flexibility in the cost of some of the products and things that they offer, but this is, I think they called it level B pricing from the vendor, and it's probably just about the best pricing that I've ever seen out there for it. So it's a substantial amount of money, but when we factor in the cost of what we're actually using and what it would cost us otherwise, we would easily be over $300,000 just to license one time the things that we need in the district, and that wouldn't give us any updates or new versions of the software. By doing this on a yearly basis, it always allows us to have the latest and greatest software.
So we're always up to date. Whereas
Yes.
years ago, we used to have a version, and then eventually we had to figure out when to get the next version. So, any questions?
Mr. Centers?
I seem to recall that at some point, Microsoft has made these programs available for families, maybe at a discounted price. Is that something that is part of this deal? Or?
Yes, it actually is included in this deal for students and student, staff, parents. And I believe they can get that at a very highly discounted rate. I want to say it's in the teens of dollars for Microsoft Office that they can install on their home computers or if they've got a student machine or anything like that. So
Great.
it's a huge savings for the students and staff and members of the community on their personal devices as well.
Great, perfect. Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none.
That's nice.
If I
Now,
can put that on regular agenda.
now, is this, what's going to go on the agenda? Because we got two proposals.
Well, we actually, the proposal is, and we can write this so that it, however it works properly. My thought was that it's really a proposal for a 3-year contract, but really, I guess it's a 14-month with a 2-year extension, if that would.
Yeah, we'd like to
Okay.
write it as one.
Yeah,
One.
so I'd like to
Just
have it
write
as
it as
one.
one,
All
okay.
we're trying to do is get, that those 2 months are prorated, so it really
So to pick up.
is the same price. So we'd like to write it as one, and if I'm not wrong, it's not, is it a 1 and a 1 and a 1, or is it?
That was technically, yeah,
Technically
so
what it was,
but we're
right?
just adding 2 months to
So-
one of
So
them.
one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have the option to go 1, 1, 1, but what we're saying is it's one proposal, and we'll work up the price so that it totals out appropriately.
Okay, so when it comes to us, it'll be just one
3-year
proposal.
Right, it will,
Okay.
right. And so we'll have the 90-something thousand plus the 280,000 as the singular price.
All right, so this will go on the regular agenda?
Yes.
All right,
you.
very good. All right, then that'll take us to 3G, renewal of web hosting services.
Okay, renewal of the district web hosting services. So we're on an IT roll. As you know, we use a company template to web host for the district. It's time for renewal, and our recommendation is to continue with we have a trigger in the contract to go for 1 or 2 years. We're suggesting 2 years because even though we would like to do our research, and maybe where we're at right now is we'll end up being the best company to be our host. Maybe they won't, but that takes time to research, to find out, and also to essentially train if we're going to go in a different direction. So it's our position that going with the 2 years now gives us the opportunity to start next school year to begin that search and work through the next 2 school years to see what direction we're going to go with web hosting.
There are certainly some additional capabilities we would like to see and some greater ease of use than our current web hosting software. Certainly, I think if Mrs. Jenkins were here, she would like that represented. But also making a switch with that for all of the webmasters in the district and the folks who help maintain those sites, as well as our own internal processes, is a very significant undertaking. And so, at this point, although again, there are some capabilities we would like to see that we don't currently have, that perhaps some other companies do, we'd like to really take our time over the next year with some due diligence, and then if we look to transition, having a very thoughtful and well laid out transition plan, should we choose to change our web hosting software after that time.
Yeah, for those of you that were involved or here when we made that change the last time, which again was also 3 years ago, around the time that I started, it's an extremely involved process. There was 30 to 50,000 pages of information that had to be converted over, everything from individual teachers' pages and things like that, and transferred into the new system, and making sure that every page was still displaying correctly and that staff could get in and they had access to it. And there's a lot of specific information out there. It takes quite a long time, even after we had made that decision to make the change, to get everything ready for that cutover, and then in addition to train all the staff and get them up to speed on how to use it. It was quite involved.
Any other questions? Okay, this will go on the regular.
Regular agenda.
Okay.
I think you're getting released.
I think Tim can go.
Unless you want us.
Did you want to
Unless
talk
you
about
want to talk about
cafeteria
cafeteria.
leaders?
It's been a pleasure to be a part of the Phil Francis Show.
Thank you.
I'm up for an Emmy.
Thank you.
Dispense with the
Thank you.
monologue.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
All right, that'll bring us to 3H, purchase of cafeteria tables, 2013 bond.
Okay, thank you very much. The cafeteria tables, we are going to purchase from the 2013 bond for all 3 high schools, all 3 middle schools, all 3 upper elementary schools, and just a small handful, 5 K-4 schools that have anywhere between 1 to 5 freestanding tables, because as you know, our K-4s have the wall-mounted that come out, but there are a few that do have. So just to run you through where we're at and what we're purchasing, first of all, we're through the bid consortium in school specialty, which gave us a discount as well through the volume of our order. But we're going to be putting, they're 12-person tables, 12-foot tables, 16-person bench tables at the elementaries and middle schools, essentially replacing what they have now with a newer and what we think is a sturdier product. So the old ones are exactly that, the old. They're the traditional ones that you think of that break in the middle, lift up, they have the little wheels, they're easy to clean under, they're easy to maneuver and manipulate around. We're in fact also purchasing a few extra for the upper L's and middle schools so they can have, if they need to replace one, so a little bit of extra stock, or sometimes they use them in the halls with events, etc. So that's what we're getting up through 8th grade. In the high schools, we are actually going with the, not the bench model, but the stool model. Those are also 12-foot tables, 2 6-foot sections that do the same thing. They lift at the middle, roll in, ease of use, ease of sight lines. The custodians really do like them. I will give you a little background. Franklin High School is finishing up their 2nd year. Their south cafeteria has my apologies, but I've got something in my eye, so I'm going to try to fight through it. This is why I'm going to get an Emmy. I'm going to power through. The Franklin's South cafeteria, they filled 2 years ago. Their North cafeteria still has just straight tables with individual chairs around them. They put 12 chairs around their tables. We asked them what they thought, because we said, boy, those look really sharp. What do you think of them? They really liked them. The custodial staff liked them. Their administrative team talked to me about them. I asked, what do the students think? I had a conversation with one of the administrators at Franklin, and he told me he's never had a complaint from students. Students aren't concerned with the fact that it's an individual stool at them. They have the space to move to wherever they so choose. In fact, he went so far as to say on the North cafeteria, where they have chairs and straight tables, he said, we don't have students pull chairs up to add spots. He said they just find a place at a table with enough spaces for them. So discussing with Churchill and Stevenson as well, they were on board. We've measured out, we're doing a replacement in those, that'd be the proposal is to replace the 2 full cafeterias, Stevenson and Churchill, and then the North cafeteria. So Franklin will get less because they already have the South cafeteria. The total cost, as you can see, is $324,743.48, and that actually would include some extra replacement stools up front for stock at the 3 high schools in case something happens with a stool in the future.
Questions? President Burke.
Mr. Francis, it sounds like you've addressed the concern that I don't remember who, but one of my board members brought up, which was the concern of what if you have 12 seats taken and you've got a 13th student? I mean, that's frankly, those of us who have had students in high school, and I know we have at least one of our high school teachers here, lunchtime, and this same thing is true with middle school, lunchtime, and where am I going to sit, am I going to be able to sit with my friends, is probably the biggest stressor before a student starts school, and that first week or 2 of school. With this being a finite amount of seats at that table, it sounds like you have already addressed that concern with administration, and it sounds to me too like we're going to have some of these tables that have stools and still have some with tables and chairs or benches that are
No, they're going to be all tables with stools.
All stools with tables.
But
Okay.
we are planning to have enough seats that there's space for everyone. So as it's been
Right.
explained to me, there has not been an issue nor a complaint from any students that there's not enough space. If there's 4 stools left at any given table and there's 5 or 6 in a crew coming up to sit, They just find a place with 5 or 6 spaces, is how it was described to me. Now, I will backtrack a little to our middle schools and our lower elementaries that are going to have benches. While you could jam a lot of kids on a bench, a lot of the schools have policies on a finite number. They don't want you, quote-unquote, jamming in. They will say, there's 12, and the younger you get, obviously, you can get some more on there. Even the benches are rated for between 12 and 16, I'm sorry, I keep saying 12. I got the 12 feet. 16 to 18 seats, based upon, obviously, the size of the student. So in our youngest, smallest children, they might be able to get 18, but I know that the upper L's and middle schools will discuss no, I don't know if they call them jam rules, but there's only so many to a bench.
Right, to a section.
To a section of bench. There are pros and cons to bench versus stool and anywhere you go, but the high schools were actually quite adamant against the bench. They are too difficult to get in and out of. They are far less ADA and just generally compliant of getting in, because there's only one entry point on either side.
Right.
Even that little break in the middle isn't really an area to get in, whereas the stools have an individual entry point at each slot. So there is no slide down, get out, I gotta pop out kind of thing.
Especially as the kids get larger.
Right, right. So just, I did have some discussions with the principals and the custodians about an opportunity to have bench. I asked them, I said, we can get benches, and that was a non-starter. Stools, the conversation was, Franklin was quite pleased with them, and Stevenson and Churchill was looking towards them.
Okay. Are we ordering enough, do we have enough physical space in our cafeterias to order enough to have some flexibility? Again, going toward that same concern. I mean, if you walk in a movie theater and there are 2 seats and they're not next to each other, there's 2 seats.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't speak to the emotional safety of our students either. Are we able to order enough to have a little bit of extra seating so that our students can eat lunch with someone they know, with their friends, whatever?
The numbers discussed were definitely plenty at Franklin and at Churchill. The size of the Churchill cafeteria is quite large versus the number of students that they have. Same with Franklin with the 2 open air cafeteria ends. Stevenson, we did a number count. I actually went to Stevenson because I was concerned that I did the math on it, and I thought, I don't know how this is going to work. I sat down with their principal, their assistant principal for business, and their building supervisor. We walked through the cafeteria, and the building supervisor said, I've got it all numbered out. He said, I know exactly how many would be in here, and we have plenty of space for the students. I asked Mr. Harper, the principal, at your highest lunch, because they're never, you'd think they'd be evenly spaced, but they're not. And he was comfortable with the seating that he had and his lunches for going into next year.
So we have enough seating so that we'll always have a little bit of open available seating so that we're not putting a student into an uncomfortable and distressing situation.
As it's been mapped out for me, yes. And I do know that if you have a chair bench situation and there's a gap in there, much like there might be a gap in a stool, they could scoot down the same on a stool
that's reasonable,
as they could for a bench to say, okay, there's 2 on the end now, not 1 and 1. Okay. It's going to be a slight adjustment, but we're very comfortable. I'm comfortable just based upon the input. And I can only go off what the buildings are telling me they're good with, and I'm comfortable saying that they told me that they have a positive input for this.
Okay.
Mrs. Crabtree.
Along those lines at Stevenson, I know one of their cafeterias, I believe, have round tables.
The
And
south
then
side.
the south side, and then the north side has long benches.
They're going to all be benches.
They will all.
Not benches.
I know what you're saying. They'll
Yeah,
all be long
the 12-foot
tables.
tables, yes.
So even in that.
The north and south.
Okay. Oh, I don't know if I like that, but, I mean, I'm not there, but it seemed to be nice because you had round on one side and long tables on the other, and I think the kids like a choice in that case. You can't do a round with stools?
You wouldn't fit enough.
It wouldn't fit, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
One of the other things, just as another option that Mr. Archibald had mentioned, is oftentimes there will be stacks of chairs along the wall in the cafeteria. And so, for instance, if you needed to put one down at the end of a table here or there. That's certainly something that we could do as well. I think they'd like to limit that as much as possible so that we're not, one, crowding the table, and two, not needing to utilize those chairs as much. Part of this is to be able to not only have enough seating, but also have efficiency of cleaning and things, so that the cafeteria is ready for the next group, the next day, the next, folks that are using that. But we do feel comfortable. We were definitely cognizant of those questions and had talked about some different options, including, one, that a reminder from a couple of our folks on cabinet that there are limitations even to the bench seating, that you can't just, that usually there's kind of a how many bottoms in a section anyway, which is similar to the stool idea. But then also having the option of, a couple of stacks of chairs in the, along the wall in the cafeteria also being another flexible option, for a group if they needed to add a seat here or there, so.
Mr. Centers?
Yeah, and I think just, even if we could fit 16 students at a chair, there might always be a 17th student that would want to sit at that table. But, so there's always going to be that issue, I think, no matter how many you sit at a table. But I think there's practical reasons that this is a good choice, so.
Yeah, I know the custodial staff will appreciate it. Our teams are taxed with regard to time, staffing, et cetera. It would be a bonus for them. I think they look pretty sharp. I know we've all been over at Franklin. It does look good, and they've been functional. So, I mean, we've really sort of taken the 2-year, it was never supposed to be a pilot, but we sort of taken the 2-year pilot from Franklin and based upon their feedback and I guess the discussion from the other 2 buildings and just kind of rolling with it.
I guess one other question. They fold up pretty easily, are they?
They're just like the bench. They have the wheels too, and they pop into a little tent.
Okay.
Right now, when you have tables and chairs, you have to move all the chairs.
Oh, yeah, I'm aware
and
of
the
that.
table, yeah, and then they shift them, and then they shift them back, yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered as portability, if you wanted to open up that room, they stack pretty well, and you could stack, they wheel
Put 'em up to the
and
side.
stack well. Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, this will be on regular.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we're coming into the home stretch. 3J, exterior door frame replacements, sinking fund.
Yes. This is a sinking fund purchase for exterior doors and/or door frames at, I think I counted up 6 buildings: Franklin, Stevenson, Frost, Cleveland, Coolidge, and Jackson. Some have a single door, some have a double door, and a couple buildings have maybe 2 single doors or 2 double doors. What we're looking at here are frames and/or doors that are becoming faulty, and we're going to purchase through sinking fund dollars the door, frame, and labor for each spot, and whether that particular door is still functional, it's the frame that's failing, we'll save what's still working and replace the frame, put the door back on. If it's the door that's faulty, we'll be replacing the door, and if it's both frame and door, we'll be replacing both. So we're trying to make sure that we just don't rip out all the doors and frames everywhere and put new ones in if things are still working, right? So we're having water intrusion underneath because of the failure of the frame or jam. We're having issues like that, so we're trying to, or corrosion, yeah, so corrosion. I could just give you a real quick example. Frost gets water in that back hall that was where we connected probably a dozen years ago. The back where it was in, out, I can't even think of which direction that's facing. I think it's south. Yeah. There's a door jam that water will come. I can't even imagine what yesterday's rain produced from that, but we're trying to fix items like that.
Okay, and the total cost is?
Total cost we have is.
$55,395?
Yes.
Yes, $55,395. And that again would be a sinking fund purchase for the changing of, like I said, either doors and/or frames.
We're pleased to have
Exterior.
another Livonia company
Yep.
tonight that we'll be
That's good.
recommending.
Yes.
It's always great to see.
Ray Haven Group out of Livonia.
Always great to see a local business be able to take on some of this work.
You do have they were actually the single, the lone bidder, but it did fall within the realm.
And it worked out.
Mhm.
Okay, any questions? Okay, this will be on regular.
Be on regular, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Francis, we can let you go.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Everyone have a nice evening.
Thank you.
And President Burton, we are done with building and site.
Thank you.
Mr. Roulier would be proud.
He would be proud, yes.
Mr. Snack.
Ran one of his records, I'm sure. Our next item on our agenda this evening is item 4, Finance Committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Bonnefield.
Thank you, President Burton. We have one item, to be no surprise, is we're talking about the budget updates with Mrs. Smith.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you? Doing well, thank you. It's my pleasure to go over with you an update on our final budget amendment for 16-17, as well as an update on our proposed budget for 17-18. We have some additional information since we last met, so I wanted to take this opportunity to fill you in on the latest. So what you see before you, again, is our beginning fund balance this school year was $8.3 million. The revenue is still projected to be 148 point, just shy of $3 million, so that hasn't changed since the last time we took a look at the numbers. But what has changed is a reduction in the expenditures. So again, similar to what I did during the during our second budget amendment, was again went line by line and made adjustments for what was, what we can now pretty accurately determine will be our actual expenditures for the year. So I'm estimating that our expenditures will be $142.7 million. Various changes, I should say, there was adjustments to various categories, the largest being salaries and benefits. During the first, or the amendment that I presented in March, again, just being very conservative, wanting to make sure that I didn't cut more than I knew was actually going to come in. So now that we're later on in the year, I feel very comfortable, reducing the salaries and benefits based on our current staffing and what I project will be the remaining payments for the rest of the school year. So that was the largest piece. We saw decreases in a few other areas, but the main was the salary and benefits. So when we take that into consideration, I'm anticipating an ending fund balance of $13.8 million, or 9.33%, and that we can then use to start off our next school year. So for the 17-18 budget, starting with a fund balance of $13.8 million, the revenues haven't changed again since I last saw you, but we do have some new updates to the expenditure side. So we're anticipating expenditures of about $144.3 million, and that would leave us with a fund balance of $16.9 million, or 11.47%. So the few things that we've now added into this, we have additional information on retirements, knowing people have applied for retirement, so we wanted to build in that savings into our proposed budget for 17-18. So that is a decrease to the expenditure line. Another adjustment that we've made, we have received some additional information regarding our Title II and Title I grants. We're anticipating to see some reduced funding there. The latest we've heard is that Title II grant will be cut by 50%, and our Title II grant is what we use to pay for part of our curriculum coordinators, as well as for professional development opportunities for our staff. and we felt that it was very important not to cut those programs or to cut those services. So we're proposing using some general funds to offset that reduction in title grant funding. So that is an increase to expenditures for the 17-18 budget. Also, during our one of our last times together, you had seen a textbook proposal, and so we're putting some money into the budget for those additional textbook purchases for the 17-18 school year. And a few things I wanted to point out too, again, some of the things that aren't covered in these numbers would be the contract negotiations. We do have our, most of our groups are open right now, if not all. I think that's actually all, yeah. The change in at-risk funding, we haven't gotten any more information on that, so what's included in this budget is what the current at-risk funding is. There's a lot of strings tied to the at-risk funding for the coming year. We're hoping that those get lifted, but as of now, not knowing how that's going to pan out, we did not include any increase in at-risk funding in our proposed budget. Another item kind of on the horizon that we're keeping an eye on is a potential change to Medicaid funding. That's at the federal level. There's talks of cutting that, so that could have an impact on our general fund. Right now, that's a revenue stream for us. They help offset the costs that we provide or that we're providing to our students. So we're going to keep a close eye on that. Without having a lot of details, though, I didn't put a number to that, but I just wanted to make you aware that that's a change we could see next school year. The next one is the actual per pupil funding from the state. So in the proposed budget, I took an average of all three as it relates to the foundation allowance, and we don't actually know what it is going to be. I'm hoping in the next couple weeks, we get more solid information so that during our next committee meeting, I can provide you with the actual increase in per pupil funding. And lastly, and something that we're keeping an eye on again is the potential MIPSers retirement reform. There's lots of discussions and, again, not exactly sure how that's going to pan out and what it'll mean for our district. So we're watching that very closely, and I'll update you as soon as I have an update. And I wanted to mention that this is an ongoing update. Again, next time we meet, we'll have new numbers for you. One of the things that hasn't changed since I brought this to you last was a change in enrollment numbers. We are going to get additional information, though, the first week in June. So next time I present this to you, I'll be able to get a better idea of where we will be with our enrollment. So that will have an impact on these numbers. So this again, it's kind of a moving thing. We're keeping an eye on a lot of things, but just wanted to give you an update on where we currently stand. With that, I wanted to turn it over to Superintendent Oquist to give you an update on a few things.
So as you know, I shared quite a bit of information in my packet to you last Thursday with regard to the revenue estimating conference at the state level. And so, as you know, we saw good news in the school aid fund. We saw not great news in the general fund for the state. And so there is lots of speculation about how that will pan out for schools in particular. Certainly, anytime we see growth and projected continued growth over the next 3 years in the school aid fund, that's a very positive thing. It is offset, again, by concerns that the school aid fund would potentially be rated to fill the gaps in the general fund that exist currently. The other piece of that is, at this point as of Friday, the deliberations and discussion regarding the budget, we had hoped to get a pretty clear picture from leadership where the proposed budget would be for next year. Those talks have stalled in regard to some standoffs with regard to the MIPSers reform. And so I included information for you in your update last week. We need to be continuously vigilant about our advocacy with regard to changes to the MIPSers reform. And I've sent information before. You'll be getting more information as well. Our voices need to be collectively heard from across the district on this topic. Certainly, as we know, the governor has proposed continuing to use the hybrid plan that's currently in place.
We also know the devastating impact this could potentially have on schools if those reforms take place. Even though there is a surplus in the school aid fund, that would only last a certain amount of time. So that's one piece on which our voices all need to be heard. The second piece is really taking a look at the per pupil funding. As we've talked about here before, and as I've shared with you in my communications in my updates, the House proposal with regard to the $100 per pupil is obviously the best proposed budget with regard to just specifically the per pupil funding. We're hearing a lot surrounding the 2X formula. Certainly in that regard, we fall on the single end, and so the governor's budget was the 50 and 100. The Senate's was in the 80s and 160s, and for us, neither of those would be as strong as the $100 per pupil. And our message has been to the legislature, and I would hope that everyone's message continues to be that anything less than that really has us going backward. And so right now, we have not budgeted for that $100 because, again, as the discussion continues, we're hearing more and more with regard to a stronger penchant for the 2X formula, which has us concerned that we may be closer to the $50 per pupil, which would, in essence, set us backwards for next year. Even though it's an increase, when you look at the cost, the cost of living increases with regard to doing business in every area and every facet of our work, that just quite simply doesn't keep up with our costs. And so our message has been, I would continue to have your message be to our legislators, that really anything less than that $100 per pupil really moves us backward. If we compound any of that with regard to MIPSR's reform, that is not adequately funded and that falls on the backs of either local districts or of the school aid fund, that also compounds that issue. So again, I know I've shared quite a bit of information with you, and I would just continue to invite you to join me and all of our staff in advocacy on those issues. It is important that we all have our voices heard on adequate increases in our per pupil funding, at-risk funding. We highlighted tonight the need for supports that exist. We are so proud in this county to be able to put that forward, but that is, again, because of the support of our voters. And so as we look at that and we look at the needs across the state, we know from our school adequacy funding report, two of the areas targeted with regard to students with special needs and our ELL population and the costs that continue to rise. And so those at-risk dollars and the potential for growth in that, even though there are very specific uses for that, we know that can make a really positive impact on our students. And so our focus area, my focus area in advocacy is per pupil funding, at-risk funding, and keeping the hybrid plan as is currently in place. So I would encourage that to continue to be the message that you are sending as well. I think it's so important. We cannot. There isn't a more critical time than the next coming week or two with regard to that. So I would encourage each of us to continue to use our voices, and any of our staff or community who are interested and supportive of our schools to do the same. So those are some of the unknowns at the state level. At the federal level, as Ms. Smith commented, the Title II funding is something we're watching closely, and then the Medicaid reimbursement, which is quite a significant sum for our district. There was an article yesterday in the paper, I don't know if you had a chance to read that really went into detail with regard to the Medicaid reimbursement and how the loss of that funding would impact school districts. So those are all pieces that we'll continue to watch. We'll also continue to watch for, hopefully, growth in our in the revenue coming in from the state. A couple other pieces that we will, as Ms. Smith talked about, the enrollment numbers are an important number for us that we'll continue to update. The first week in June will be an important week where we will have more solid information with regard to enrollment in our magnet programs and our out-of-district school of choice, as well as updated kindergarten numbers and numbers across our K-6. So these are really critical times with regard to our enrollment, and we'll continue to update that on the budget in June prior to bringing you the final proposed budget
A couple other pieces with regard to staffing. As you know, we have a couple of the positions with regard to the enhancement millage that we're going to finalize specific to some of the school-based and differentiated plans, and so we'll put some final FTEs and dollar amounts to that. Then one other piece, not a significant dollar amount, but it's something I know that's important to the board. You had asked prior in the year what we were going to do with regard to the PACs and helping to manage those huge investments that our community has made, that our district has made. And so again, we certainly wanted to put in place supports to be able to maintain this tremendous investment and beautiful facility, as well as the very high-tech equipment that is also involved in use, not only for our schools, but for outside groups. And so we're looking at a plan for supporting both Franklin and Stevenson by utilizing, potentially utilizing a current staff member who's not full-time at this point in time, but looking to increase those hours to be able to cover, at least initially, next year for Franklin and Stevenson. And we'll continue to take stock of how that works. Right now, we also have the theater crew at Franklin, which is part of one of our courses there. We'll have the same at Stevenson. But as you know, we also need, and what we've learned from surrounding districts is that someone being able to monitor and maintain those extensive investments is very important, especially related to the technology. And so again, that will not be a significant piece, but again, those are all the pieces that we'll continue to work out over the next 3 to 4 weeks, and that will be part of the final budget proposal that we bring to you at our final June meeting. So if there's any questions, we shared a lot of information earlier on the enhancement millage. As you see, there are a number of pieces that make up the proposed budget, some of which are moving targets and some we have a pretty good idea right now. I certainly appreciate Mrs. Smith's continued determination and dedication throughout the year to look at over a couple of thousand line items that we have in our budget, which she has done now repeatedly throughout the year and continue to adjust those, looking at a 3-year look back as far as what we spend, adjusting those as we move forward. It's always that balance between being conservative so that we always are sure that, especially as we've worked with the fund balances we have over the past number of years, that we always have additional monies set aside should any unforeseen or unexpected things arise. And then also balancing that with wanting to be as close as possible. Generally, we've talked about, I know Dr. Liepa for many years had talked about being within 2%. And on a budget like ours, if you think about 2% on your home budget, you'd have to be pretty on target. When you're talking about a $150 million budget, that 2% is a larger dollar amount, but not when you're talking about running an organization of our size. So she's continuing to work very, very hard to bring those line items and those expenditures as close to where we are and where we have been, because again, you can't just go on 1 year. We know utilities were good this year, right? We had 70-degree days in February. That may not be the case next year. And so we always have to have some cushion there. But she's really done a tremendous job of taking a look at each of those pieces, and what she continues to bring to you continues to be honed to get us closer and closer to where we anticipate we will be in the fall.
Questions? President Burton.
Do we know, I know you did mention first week of June for enrollment numbers. Do you know or do you not know right now where we are with our regular kindergarten enrollment? Do you know where we stand?
We're generally, Mrs. Scott, do you have the most current kindergarten numbers and where we are on target with regard to year over year?
As of the last count, we were still under, about 40 kindergartners, but now I'm supposed to get a new count tomorrow, and it's looking good.
Okay. So we can provide you an update in the update this Thursday, and then we'll get all of the K-6 numbers again on June 2nd.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Other questions? I have one question to Mrs. Oquist.
Okay.
You talked a lot about advocating. Is there somewhere that you could direct our community, our staff, and the board to particular talking points that we might be able to look at, and
Sure.
as well as contact information, could you help direct us to where the best places
I
to
can
find
absolutely have
them?
Mrs. Jenkins move that up. I believe we have some contact information on the site, but we'll try to make that more prominent
Okay.
on some of the hot topics right now.
That would be great. And are we able to put some talking points on there so that we have, we can prep everybody as well as possible to make it as
Absolutely.
easy as possible for them to be able to, or advocate for our students as well as our staff. and our
Absolutely.
administration. Thank you very much. Is there anything else that anyone would like to, questions? Mrs. Bradford, please.
Can you just talk briefly about the fund balance and how we are projected to increase our fund balance? However, what is a healthy fund balance percentage for our audience members?
Sure. Based on a recommendation from the Michigan School Business Officials, they recommend a 15 to 20% fund balance. Although, the economic times are having an impact on all the districts here in the state. So during the fall, when our auditors were here, Plant Moran, they shared with us that the statewide average fund balance is just over 10%. So many districts are falling under that recommended 15 to 20% threshold. But, I'm happy to show on here that we are, working towards that because there is such an importance of having the fund balance so that it can absorb some of those unforeseen changes throughout the year. That's one of the things too, as we get our budget closer and closer to where we're actually going to be and kind of lessen that cushion, we're then going to feel the impact if we have a very high year in gas costs or something like that and fuel. So I will be needing to update you next year if that's the case. So that's one of the main reasons, or a major reason, we like to see that fund balance at a healthy amount so that we can absorb those costs without having to make any program adjustments mid-year. So I'm glad that we're getting to that point. So I know it's taken a lot of time and some tough decisions, but we're getting into a point where we are getting more stable with the finances, and then I think that allows an opportunity for our district to get back to addressing the needs in our classroom and doing all that we can to support our students and our staff. So
And just to follow up, in the importance of that number being, when you look at these 5 areas, contracts, change at-risk funding, all these actual per pupil funding and MIPSers, we just are at unstable. We don't really know exactly what's going to happen with that. So we need to have a healthy fund balance in order that we may have to take a look at that. Is that accurate, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why Mrs. Smith wanted to point out that there are some pieces that will be included in the budget next year.
Okay.
As you highlighted, some of those pieces that, because we don't know what those dollar amounts will be, they have not been included. And so certainly those would be added on to the expenditures for next year. We don't have a placeholder in there right now, for instance, for any of the agreements or things.
And those are really significant pieces, I would say, personally. So.
And some of those will be under our control, and some of those will be out of our control
Right.
with regard to either state or federal funding. And so it really is just always making sure that we're aware of what those potentials could be, and then also what we anticipate with regard to the things that are within our control. And those are some of the things we've discussed with the board. So
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Okay.
There are also unforeseen items, and I'd like to say it was so long ago we don't know, but there were several of us who sat on the board still when we took, and Mrs. Oquist was a member of cabinet at the time, when in October we took a $470 per student hit, which crippled some school districts. We need to use our funds judiciously, but we also have got to keep ourselves on guard. It was 6 or 7 years ago that we had that. We still haven't crawled out of that hole, but we've got to be prepared at any time that we could take that kind of hit, and we've got to be able to continue to sustain our employees throughout that school year should something like that happen, and our programs and our students, and get them taken care of.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Smith.
Thank you. Thank you for
Appreciate all
this
your hard work.
opportunity.
Mrs. Fonfield, are we all set?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. That concludes finance.
All right, thank you. We are on to item 5, Curriculum Committee, and I will turn the meeting over to Mrs. Bradford.
President Burton, thank you. Tonight, we have one item on the agenda, and that would be the geometry textbook adoption recommendation. And Mrs. Teresa O'Brien and Mr. Ben Hillard are going to come up and give us some information on that.
Hello.
Exciting news.
Oh, it is exciting.
It is.
It is, and it goes very well with our last textbook adoption. How about we'll just put it between us, okay? So Mr. Hillard and I are here to bring the recommendation to purchase new high school geometry textbooks. So the textbook is the same publisher that the algebra textbook that we came to last month and asked for funds to purchase. So I want to tell you a little bit about the process that he used because he ran both committees together, the Algebra 1 and the Geometry Committee. So starting last fall, both groups of teachers worked together because their goal was if they could find a series, so a set of books that went together from the same publisher, they thought that would be the best solution to what they needed. So they began together reviewing materials, but then they broke off into the Algebra 1 group and the Geometry group to do their slices, to dig into the books, to take them back to their classroom and see what they needed to, determine what was, important. So they thought that the concepts would flow better and there'd be less gaps if they had the same publisher. So, as you know, our district has specific requirements for a textbook adoption, and so the committee spent time beginning with reviewing the curriculum and our content standards for the state of Michigan, and then determining a list of needs and what the ideal materials would have in order to meet those needs. So a few items from that list was alignment to the new Michigan state standards, engaging students in meaningful problem solving, a deeper understanding of concepts for students, authentic applications of the mathematical concepts and procedures, and online access to the textbook, so that's become something we need. And then challenging students, so challenging our students, and then the textbook also supporting teachers with how to meet those challenges for their students. Again, they developed a rubric that had 21 indicators to evaluate the textbook. They had 3 main categories: focus and coherence, rigor and balance, and instructional support. Teachers identified mathematical concepts and a lesson for each text and did a slice, which means they compared each one of those lessons on that common content and ranked that. Our Envision series received the highest overall ranking, and it was no lower than 3rd in any one area. Then teachers also shared the text with their students and had them discuss the books. And some of the students' quotes about Envision were, it makes math seem more applicable and interesting. And I chose the green book, which is Envision, because it has more varieties of explanations to help me understand the concepts. So those were just 2 of the quotes students had. Finally, the committee came to consensus that this was the best choice for our needs, and it met our evaluation criteria and developed the mathematical concepts that they chose as priorities during their analysis. This series provides engaging tasks that deepen conceptual understanding, as well as strengthening and applying procedural skills. The total cost for the geometry textbook purchase would come to $120,605.17, and the funds for this purchase would come from the district textbook budget. Mr. Hillard and I would be happy to answer any questions or comments from the board.
Are there any questions? Mr. Centers.
So Mrs. Burton doesn't have to ask the student question.
I know what you're saying. You take it this time.
The electronic, this comes with an electronic version, correct?
Yes, it does.
And the electronic version is not any cheaper than a hardcover version. And if we were to buy one version, either the electric or the hardcover, we would get the opposite kicked in for free.
Yes.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, there's no cost savings to just go with the electronic, unfortunately.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford. What do we get with the purchase, Teresa? The hardcover, and that's it?
We get the student textbook, we get the teacher set of resources, and then we get 7 years online support and textbooks.
And with that 7-year online, it's also 7 years of this student companion, which is like a journal workbook that they can use.
Is that a consumable?
This is, yep. So we have 7 years. This is also with that electronic component, so that the same license for 7 years of electronic and 7 years of these.
And then this book flows right into the algebra?
Yes, so they're written by the same company, they're both 2018 versions of, and the teachers, the high school teachers felt that they had the most coherence and there'd be the least amount of gaps by getting the same series.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes. So after the 7 years, can we buy that book by itself, or do we need to buy the whole set again? Those textbooks.
Consumables, you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
The consumables we can purchase
They can be
alone.
purchased separately. The online could be purchased at that time, just renewed separately.
Perfect. And we would still use the actual
Right, yeah,
textbooks.
we don't have to rebuy the.
Correct.
Anybody else with a question? Mrs. Jarvis?
I would be remiss if I didn't say it. I still find it intriguing that we spend twice as much as we need to because we buy a full set of either the electronic or the hardcover and are given a second set, the same number, that we don't use. I don't understand why we don't purchase half or 2/3 of that and have the duplicate set as well and utilize both so that we can realize a significant savings.
Mr. Centers?
We do encourage students to use the electronic version, correct? Like that's something they can use at home?
We do,
or- yeah.
we do. And I think as we grow, as having more devices in schools, more may use them in the classroom, but every classroom doesn't have devices to get on the electronic textbook at this point. So, you know, in our classrooms, we need the books. We have the electronics so they don't have to take the books home. So it is, I understand, and I, being new in this role, am amazed that there's no cost savings either, that we seem to be going to an electronic world. But at this point in time, there isn't yet. And so I think we need both to support in the classroom and then at home, then they don't have to carry those books home.
Okay, any other questions? I guess I have one. I guess you mentioned that currently the 3 different high schools are using different geometry books or different, not the same?
We have 2 different textbooks.
2 different textbooks, so this will alleviate that, they will
Right.
all be using the same
This
textbook
is the
across the
last,
board.
this is the last core class, required class, that has different textbooks at different schools.
Okay, that sounds
Math and
positive too,
science.
that sounds positive.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so this, Mrs. Burton.
Just a thanks to those staff members, and I see at least some in our audience right now.
Yeah, we have
with
one
kind
here.
of smiles.
We
Yes,
have one-
it
one
goes-
here today.
Yes, to those that spent the time researching these books and
Yes.
piloting these books and so forth, it is not just simply a decision to buy a book, and it's not sitting down for an afternoon and studying it, but it's a months-long process. But, yeah, I'm seeing, like, this going in the audience.
That's an
But thank you to
understatement.
those who have spent the extra time above and beyond their regular job duties to research these and come forward with these recommendations. It is appreciated knowing that the staff that we trust is recommending these also.
Yeah, we had a great team, and Mrs. Smith is here, she did a lot of work on it too, so.
Thank you, Mrs.
Thank you.
Smith.
Sure she did.
And
Oh,
whoever
yes.
wrote this up, it was very helpful to just know what the team came up with and what their thoughts were about each book as opposed to this is what we're recommending. It was just really helpful to see all the background that went in, and it was really great. So
Was
thank
that
you
you,
for all that
Mr.
work.
Hillard?
Maybe.
Nice, nice job.
I'm sure the
Nice
format
job.
borrowed from previous people.
Oh, give yourself some credit.
And it was
Okay.
also supported by the secondary principals, correct?
Yes, it was.
Yes. Okay, then this could be put on the regular agenda. Okay, that concludes our curriculum committee for this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 6, Policy Committee, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Frank.
Thank you, President Burton. We have disposition of real property. Mr. Francis.
Did you miss me?
Let me just
Yeah.
give a
Or
little bit of
Mrs.
background, and then
Sorry.
we'll turn it over to Mr. Francis. So, we'd like to take a little bit of time with this, and so we also wanted to really be able to walk you through this. So what we'd like to do is almost treat this item as if this is a study session, and then give you a couple of weeks, and then we'd like to come back to it again at the next committee meeting, and then if you're comfortable moving forward, we can do so. So normally, we have a study session to be able to work through some of this. We're suggesting some changes with regard to the two policies that we know were in conflict with one another, some changes based on our conversations with Dana Abrams, who is our attorney who helps us with these pieces. And we also have some recommended additions to the administrative procedures that we'd like to add. And so Mr. Francis is going to share with you, again, there are multiple facets to this packet. And we will start by reviewing the main board policy as it relates to EBA. And before Mr. Francis takes you through it, I just want to explain the coding, because it's a little different than how Mrs. Wozniak formats it. And so I will let you know our secret decoder ring coding on this. Obviously, strike through is what we are recommending would be eliminated. That's pretty self-explanatory. The yellow, even if there is strike-through, it means that language, if the whole sentence is highlighted with strike-through, it means that language still exists in the policy, just somewhere else, and it's in the red font. Okay, so for instance, in the second paragraph, and we'll walk you through this whole piece, but the highlighted areas in the second paragraph are still included, they're just included in a different section. And then for paragraphs 3 and 4, all of that same information and the intent of that language is all included in the recommended administrative procedures. So as you know, one of the things Mrs. Abrams had shared was that the board policy should be limited to the main facets of the intent of the board, with the administrative procedures to be focused on things that may need perhaps a change more frequently than would be advantageous during the regular process. So what Mr. Francis and I did was really take a bit of a hybrid of both. Her initial recommendation was relatively brief, and we know that, this board certainly likes to keep at least a portion of, a larger portion of the intent within the policy. And so that's what we've made some additional modifications to the initial recommendations. And so, Mr. Francis, I'll have you take us through the first page of the policy.
Sure, thank you. Just so you understand, on the first page and the second page, there's nothing on the back sides of any of these. Just I wanted to keep it, I feel bad using the paper, but we wanted to keep it simple. But all of the strike-through highlights red from the first page ends up being boiled down on page 2. So stick with me on page 1, and then page 2 is simply a cleaned up version of it straight through, okay? So we have 2 items that we found. EBA and DO were 2 policies that both related to the disposition of property. DO was both real and school property, books, et cetera. So we'll address that in a moment. But on EBA, we actually have it redated today. I mean, we'll make that whatever it ends up being. But the first paragraph from the original EBA, the essence of it is still there, in that the board is not looking to sell property willy-nilly, if you will. The board's tendency and interest is to preserve and maintain the real property that the district has, both buildings and land. But there are times that you do the board, does want to move ahead and either entertain an offer that the board may get that wasn't seeking, or conversely, put out a request for proposals to purchase land. So the essence of the first paragraph remains. What was removed from it, it became a very stringent, a strict test of, we're not going to sell. You're going to have to run through this litmus test to convince the board, which essentially it's yourselves convincing yourselves to sell real property. So just that simple line in the middle and at the end took some of the stringency and the testing out of it, because previously there was an exhibit and it stated you need to kind of find items in this exhibit to prove to us that these are the reasons why we would consider selling property. So the main thought process is the board still wants to maintain its properties, but will consider it for appropriate reasons a sale of it, if that makes sense. So I'll read through that first paragraph. The Board of Education believes that it is in the interest of the Livonia Public Schools School District to preserve, maintain, and retain ownership of its lands and buildings that have current or future educational value. There's a strike-through line there, and then we get into the board will analyze any unsolicited or solicited requests for the sale and permanent disposition of its real property to determine whether there is an interest for the district to sell or disperse assets. That would be the new paragraph 1, and you can see the strikeouts and what was removed from there. As Mrs. Oquist mentioned in paragraph 2, quite a bit of that remains but comes down to the bottom. So I'm going to draw you down to the first red paragraph. The superintendent or her designee may identify any school district real property or buildings no longer required for school district purposes and recommend to the board the procedure or procedures to be followed for the sale or disposition of such real property in each particular instance. If I could stop there for a moment, the board is driving this by giving the superintendent or her designee the procedures that you want us to follow. That might be to go with a real estate consultant, put together a request for proposal and put that out. Or it might simply be yes, we had an unsolicited offer, go ahead and enter into discussions under these general guidelines, et cetera. That would be the procedures that come under control with the board.
And just as an example, we had both of those this year. So as you know, we had an unsolicited request to purchase property. We talked through very clearly on multiple occasions how we wanted to move forward, what the conditions of the sale would be. We proceeded then with negotiations on that, moved through with an appraisal, et cetera. Conversely, when the board had made the determination as part of our budgeting process to sell some of our vacant property as part of our revenue enhancement that has taken place over the past couple of years, again, on a very limited basis, but on a well-thought-out basis. We utilized a process that utilized a real estate consultant. We had an opportunity to take a look at brokers' estimated value, and then lay out a process for when and where we would put out requests for quote, et cetera. And so, as you may recall, both of those had different, what we would call conditions of sale, but they were both appropriate for each of those instances. So what this paragraph allows the board to do is determine for that particular instance, it doesn't lay out, we will always do A, B, C, D, E. Certainly, the administrative procedures are clear on, we will always have either an appraised or broker's value. I mean, there are pieces that will always remain, we will always follow in accordance with the law on disposition of property, but it allows the process that we'll go through to reflect the individual and unique circumstance of that particular potential sale.
And this language was recommended from Dana as well. And I think one of those pieces in there is that, in the sentence that I read, is that the board is going to be doing this for in each particular instance. So it's something that the board can, this board or any board would be able to discuss and then say, these are the procedures we want to follow. So continuing on, the board approval is required, just board approval is required for the process to be followed, as well as for the ultimate sale or other manner of disposition. In any event, the board reserves in its sole and absolute discretion the right to accept or reject any and all offers. And this language was highlighted up in there about having the right to reject any and all offers. Employees of the school district and members of the Board of Education shall be prohibited from purchasing directly or indirectly any real estate offered by the district. This was a holdover as well from earlier in this EBA. So in essence, that would be the policy, but then there are administrative procedures that would go with that. So you have a cleaned up copy as page 2 put together there. So those are the 3 smaller paragraphs. So there's still some specificity in this policy. It's not one sentence, the Board of Education can sell property within the law. That is an option to have that as a board policy, but I don't believe this board, and I don't think Mrs. Oquist believes this board wants quite that broad of a statement. So the specificity that you have in the policy is first really stating that you want to preserve the land for the district, but under the right reasons, you consider a sale. Then you go into the board will have control over each individual and particular instance to give the procedures to administrative team, to the superintendent or administrative team of how you want that to be carried out. And then finally just sort of lays that piece about employees, like keeping that in the language. I don't want to go on to administrative procedures. I want to give it a chance for you to ask questions or comment, either with Mrs. Oquist or myself, or even with each other at this point before we jump, or do you want to jump into the administrative procedure section?
Well, I think let's cover them, unless you have a specific question of what we have, so that you see where 3 and 4 are included in the administrative procedures. Because if there's a piece that you say, I see it in there, but I still think it belongs here, we'll move that back. We're certainly flexible on that and trying to reflect again, what our council shared with us, would be recommended, but we also want to reflect the will of the board. This is one of, your important roles is setting policy, and for something this important, we know that's essential.
The third page that you have has a X across it. That was the exhibit for EBA that I mentioned earlier about the burden of compelling interest to show that there's items here that you go, it no longer would really hold with the way it's written now. So if you go on to the 4th page, the administrative procedures are on here. We have 5 of them. Would you like me to read through them? Is that for the camera? Yes. Okay. Number 1, if any school-owned real estate is determined as no longer needed for public school purposes, the board will dispose of it in the manner prescribed by state law. Number 2, disposition may require an independent appraisal or broker's opinion of value. Now, this is where we had the conflict in the 2 different, where one just said we had to follow the law, which doesn't require an appraisal, but then there was another that stated specifically you had to have appraisal on every single one, which can be very difficult, as we've discussed in the past. These unique properties don't have, it's not like selling your home in a neighborhood where there's plenty of comparables. Number 3, the board may authorize the school district's administration to use a qualified consultant who has expertise in land sale development matters on an hourly basis to assist the board with such disposition.
Sure, I don't have that. Thank you.
The compensation paid to consultants cannot be based upon percentage or commission formulas unless approved by the board, in which case the board would seek a payment formula which allows the district to opt for the lesser of either a fixed payment schedule or a percentage on a commission formula. Number 4, proceeds derived from the sale of real property, other than that encumbered with bonded debt, shall be held in a separate capital projects fund, which shall be used solely for capital project purposes, i.e. purchasing other real property for the school district, or to be used for constructing, repairing, improving, renovating, or developing other school district real property or buildings. However, if the school district's general operating fund balance is less than the amount recommended by the guidelines set by the Michigan School Business Officials, MSBO, the Board of Education may agree to place such proceeds in the general operating fund or any other fund/account of the district as so designated by the board. There's multiple ways you can go with the recommendation. It could be a recommendation from the board itself. It could be a recommendation from the district's auditors. The MSBO is a nice tie-in to Allison's last conversation with you. It is
The standard, the industry
it is the standard, and as they move potentially, I have no idea if they would move it, but if they were to move it up or down in a percentage-wise, the board would be covered under its procedures to follow that as well, because it is the standard. The previous language, if you don't recall, was a hard number, and it was 5%, which is a considerably lower number than the 15 to 20% that MSBO recommends. So I guess the idea would be sticking with the standard as opposed to going off the board and just picking a number, because I presume that 5 came from early warning district.
Yeah.
But what happens if that legislation changes down the road as well? In this instance, you're going with the MSBO, as we said, is the standard. And then the fifth one, property formerly serving as district schools or classrooms may be rented at current market prices toward the goal that it will be income producing for the district. Please see DFG, EBH, and KG for details on leasing and rentals. This came from a piece as well where it had some cross-references, which were no longer accurate cross-references. As board policies change over the years, the letters get shifted around a little bit, so we matched them up properly. And just if someone came to this to talk about leasing, they could get back over to the leasing area.
So a couple quick pieces. An example of number 3 is certainly something that we would recommend be more part of an administrative procedure than a policy. It talks specifically about payment to a consultant, et cetera. Those are pieces that, again, that was a portion of the old paragraph 3 from EBA, and we would recommend, again, putting that into the piece of the administrative procedure.
It tends to be more of the how than the more rigid guidelines in the board policy. It's more of what they should be. Some district call it administrative guidance, administrative procedure. It is the guidance that we want to follow.
And then the number 4, again, as Mr. Francis said, that is something that we discussed a number of different options there, whether or not to put in a hard percentage. We thought something that was reflective of an industry standard that we know is published annually and updated regularly made sense. We know that that's an organization that has been around for a long time. We can anticipate it will continue to be. It's not something arbitrary. It's not something based on just a specific need at the time. It certainly still indicates that the first priority would be to put those dollars into the capital projects fund, but it also leaves the board discretion to make the decisions as our board has over the past few years, to look at the feedback from our community, which time and time again has held in high recommendation, and that the board consider sale of property as a revenue enhancement rather than touching or cutting our programs or people. So this allows the board some flexibility, but also within a guideline. It doesn't just simply say it can be put in whatever fund. It indicates the intent of the original policy, but it also allows flexibility based on the current conditions of the district at that time. Again, I know the board's intent is to write these so that they're long-lasting, and so that they can stand the test of time once we're all old and gray and gone from here, or old and not so great.
What are you getting at?
Any questions or thoughts?
Are we ready?
Are you ready?
Can I suggest that in number 1, it says the board may dispose of it in the manner prescribed by the state law?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which,
And
number
then-
1 you said?
Number 1 instead of
In
will
number 1,
dispose.
second sentence, or second line, third,
Okay.
change that to a may, and then
That we may dispose of it in the manner prescribed by law?
I think we
It
should be
needs
following the
two
law.
sentences.
Yeah.
It's,
I'm
Otherwise,
reading
we're
it.
mandated to sell.
Yeah, that's
Right.
sort of how I'm reading it.
yes, it's, if I could jump in, I read the same thing, and I think I read it the same way you did. The way I read it
too.
is, if it's no longer needed, the board will dispose of it.
Okay.
That's the way I read it.
And that's,
But-
yeah.
So
Okay,
if
so
you add a line that
may
says, and
dispose of
chooses
it-
to,
Yeah.
and chooses to dispose, it will be done so according to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that
Yes.
was in the ad. It would be
Okay.
in
Okay,
accordance.
I'm not suggesting that we break the law by any means.
Right.
That was an interesting change from will to may.
Yes.
We may follow.
Yes, half of us understood it one way, and half of us understood it the
Okay.
other.
No, I read it and I'm like, okay, we have to sell?
That's
Okay.
the same
Gotcha.
thing I saw right off the bat.
The board.
Yep.
And then in the second line, I know we've talked about, this, and there was some discussion about appraisals versus brokers and stuff, but it says disposition may require an independent appraisal or broker's opinion of value. At one point, we said that we will have one or either. I don't know if that has changed. I know that at some point, the policy said that we have to have an appraisal, which isn't necessarily the best route to go, considering the information that we've got.
Would you say will require either an independent appraisal?
Well,
or
I'm
a
wondering
broker's
if that's
opinion?
the wording that we need to go with. The way I'm reading this is it's like, we can get an appraisal or a broker's, or we cannot, and just
we can
kind of
wing it.
arbitrarily
So you want it to be will?
swing it.
Yeah, we can change
change
it
it to
because
will.
I can't
No.
imagine a situation where we wouldn't do
Right.
one or either,
Yeah.
so.
I think the
Okay.
essence
Yep.
of that one is.
You don't have
is
to
have
say
the or.
either then.
No, we
right?
don't.
No.
It just says or.
So that's, I'm good with either one, but
That's the point,
I'm
yeah.
not necessarily comfortable leaving it that
Okay.
we don't.
So it would read, disposition will require an independent appraisal or
Or
broker's opinion of value. One of the two to get the
Yes.
proper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got it.
I mean, for the minutes.
Okay, those are my only questions.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Mrs. Rick?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Number 2, I agree with Mrs. Bonfield with both of your suggestions. Number 2, I still would like to put back into policy. I'm just more comfortable if the board is ultimately responsible for selling property. I'm more comfortable with the public being confident that the board has approved that it will be given an appropriate value. The reason is, the administrative procedures are given to the board for the board's interest, but we really have no control over administrative procedures. If the Board of Education is responsible for the sale of property, I'm more comfortable with the item number 2 appearing in policy.
Would it make sense to you to put that at the end of paragraph 1, so where it says the board will analyze, I'm looking off of the clean copy, it's just easier to look at. The last sentence there, where the board will analyze any unsolicited or solicited requests for the sale and permanent dispossession of its real property, determine whether or not there's interest for the district to sell or dispossess assets. Then we could put disposition will require an independent, does that make
Yeah.
sense
Makes a
there?
lot of sense
Because
to
we've
me.
just referred to.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But we would eliminate it from the administrative
Correct.
Yes.
procedure
Correct.
totally?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
It would, just that sentence with the
Yeah.
may being turned to will become the last sentence of the
Okay.
first, just, it's a cut paste, not a copy paste.
Gotcha.
Anything else? Anyone else have any comments?
And you don't have to feel like this is it, and we
No,
can keep
yeah.
talking about it now,
Right.
but please send back and forth, and we'll continue to include this over the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Thank you. On the administrative procedure, item number 3, just the phrasing doesn't sit well. The board may authorize the school district's administration to use a qualified consultant who has expertise in land sale matters on an hourly basis. I think we should take the phrase "on an hourly basis" and move it. The board may authorize the school district's administration to use a qualified consultant on an hourly basis who has expertise in land sale development, because the hourly basis does not refer to his expertise.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Move it up and,
Yes, I think grammatically.
yeah, grammatically.
Could you do it just through a comma?
No, it still will refer to whatever immediately precedes it. Although it'd be better than what we have, so. You could comma before and after.
So you're saying
So-
move to after the word consultants?
What if it wasn't in that, within that sentence? Because the next sentence, we can have it saying that it would have to be on an hourly basis, or if it would be percentage-wise, it's the lesser of, but, like, I guess it doesn't even really need to be in that first
No,
sentence.
it really
Take it
doesn't,
out.
because it would fit nicely in the second sentence.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really going to be, the board may authorize the school district's administration to use a qualified consultant who has expertise in land sale/development matters to assist the board with such disposition.
That's a
Yes,
much better
yes,
sentence.
yes.
And then the hourly, et cetera, is actually really incorporated into the next.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even have to put that in there, is what you're saying. Yeah,
Not in that sentence.
Not in that sentence.
Are we putting it in the next sentence?
Well, when he talks about compensation, right?
Right.
Yeah, so the compensation paid to consultants cannot be based on percentage, or I'll just clean it up to have,
Yeah, clean
that
it
it would be.
We'll put it in there.
Yeah, it'll be on an hourly basis, it will be blah, 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 yeah,
You'll fix it.
right.
Okay.
Somebody's gonna have to remind me to do it, though.
You better write
I've got it.
I got it.
Good thing
Mrs.
the boss
Bonnefield?
is here.
So, and I absolutely appreciate the fact that if we're, reading this administrative procedure and we're like, hey, what if we lease that property? We maybe need some direction as to where we're going, but we're talking about the disposition of real property, and then we're throwing in number 5 that says we could rent it out, and it just, to me, it seems very displaced.
It was in the last one, and so that's why we're just hanging on. That's why it's there it's the draft. Let's make it how it makes the most sense. And it could even not be a 5, but it could have a line at the very bottom that says, cross-reference for rental, those 3 things.
Personally, I would prefer that. I think number 5 just seems like it comes kind of
Yeah.
out of the blue.
That way, if somebody stumbles upon this at the bottom, it's just, rental cross-reference is this. If you showed up with property, go here for rental.
Because it doesn't have to do with the sale.
Okay.
It's a
Right.
rental now.
That's a good point.
That is a good point. Good catch on that.
The MSBO guidelines, I understand correctly that those are printed every year?
Printed or on their website.
I found it
They're
online. I
published.
did a real quick
Okay.
search, and I found it in writing on their site, but.
Mrs. Smith
Okay.
confirmed that.
Yeah.
So it is something that could be verified and referenced back to?
Oh,
It's not-
absolutely.
It's not the opinion of any one given individual
No,
who works for
it's-
MSBO?
Right.
Right.
Got it, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that still gives us the option.
Right, may agree to place.
May agree to
Mhm.
place. So it gives us a guideline.
Right.
I have a question, a philosophical question, I guess, or a policy question more on the board policy. That first sentence in the board policy. It's the interest of LPS to preserve, maintain, and retain the ownership of its lands and buildings. And I guess my question is a board, is that what we want to say? Is that where we want to go? Not that we want to sell everything, but we are reducing as a district. We are, our students, we are consolidating, and we are closing schools. And so to continue to say we want to keep all the schools as we are closing schools, is it in the best interest with the input from the public that has said, instead of cutting programs, I really would like to see you close some of the, or not close schools, but sell some of the property that we have? Do we want to say that that is in our best interest to preserve what we have when we are continuing to consolidate and get smaller? Is that something that we want to start this policy off, or is that something that is better either reworded or taken out in terms of really using our resources wisely as a district? And I guess that's a board question. Mr. Centers.
So my thought is that there are properties that are, that we would like to maintain and retain ownership of because they could be important in the future, like the Bryant property comes to mind, or Dickinson. So I kind of, maybe it needs to be massaged, but I do like that language in there that, you know, at this point, we did think that it's important to preserve some properties.
And it does say for current or future educational value, and so I think that leaves a little bit of ability for the board to determine that we need to preserve this amount
Right.
of, as the board has long said, a couple of those larger areas. I read that a few times myself and had that same question, because that was not a recommended keep from our council. But I thought with the caveat that said that have current or future educational value allows us to say the first part with the caveat of the second. I don't know if that helps at all, but I just wanted to share that because that second piece of that sentence to me is very, very important.
Right.
I think if it were just the first portion of it, then it does seem incongruent to have a policy that lays out all of the ways that you can move forward with disposition of property, but then we say we prefer to maintain it. It really says that have current or future educational value. And so, as you know, we own a number of vacant properties, and then some with school buildings, either, you know, closed or rented at this time. I think we would all know on a continuum, you know, where many of those would fall with regard to current or future educational value, where we really would probably have no intent of ever rebuilding based on the population in that area and so on. So I don't know if that helps at all, but.
It feels like the statement with the two pieces of it says two things. One, it's not a fire sale with everything we have. But two, we're not going to, just for the sake of philosophy or circumstance, we're just going to hold everything forever. It sort of gives you both. It clearly lets the public know that the property with value is important, but it goes beyond the dollar value. It's the educational value, and then when needed. To me, it does. The two pieces, you can't have one without the other and not really, truly state what your thoughts are.
I think it still is in our best interest to maintain the properties. But there are certain circumstances under which we still need the option to sell some of those. It's just a statement of the philosophy that we're not here, we're not in the business of selling property. We're in the business of educating children. And it's still in our best interest to maintain those properties, but given certain circumstances, when it's determined that perhaps it doesn't have any more current or future value to us under those circumstances, then we can go ahead and with the decision to sell it.
Mrs. Bonnefield? I don't know.
And I know I'm still in the old school from when it was, you know, Livonia's landlocked and we can't sell anything, and I feel more comfortable having that first sentence in there. That's, you know, it's, and I still struggle with, you know, selling the property, because there's, once it's gone, and we have boundaries, and it's not like we can, you know, build a school on the outskirts of town or something like that. So I do like the having the language of being making conservative decisions based on the fact, like the funky Perrinville property down in the little swirly thing down there. I mean, I'm good with, because are we ever really going to build anything on that piece of property? No, I don't think we ever would consider it, or that would be like way, way down the road. So, that kind of stuff that, we're like, yeah, absolutely not.
Going to be a new building for our IT stuff.
There you go, on the island.
On stilts.
I'm glad Tim laughed already.
So for me, I do like to have that language. It's like, we need to be careful, but if we get to the point where like, yeah, that's just not gonna work for anything that we're gonna do, then, because it costs us money to maintain it, and it sits there and it's vacant, and there's issues with vacant property and upkeep, and, could we have more homes with more kids, and that kind of stuff, so.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. That sentence to me is important because it puts it out front for the public that we don't sell land on a whim. It's not what, like you say, we're not in that business. We're in the education business. And by putting that out there publicly, it helps us determine our priorities and our direction, which is what we're here for. So when we say that it's important for us to preserve and maintain our properties, yes, it is. And imagine the straits that would have to be so dire that we would sell something, or the situation we're in terms of consolidating. It's not something we take lightly. So I think that underscores our values, and we need to keep that there.
Does anyone else have any other?
I would like to continue. Shockingly. Shockingly. No, the end of this is actually quite. I'm going to curse myself by saying this, but I think it's quite simple. So DO, you have it says draft, but that's actually exactly how I just had to retype it, and it was already formatted to say draft. So, but that is exactly what DO is, and it's from June of '88. It's a single sentence. The board, it's fiscal management, school properties disposal. The Board of Education may sell, exchange, or lease real or personal property of the school district in accordance with law. Now, pretty simple statement. We can do it as long as we follow the law. This is what's been on the books for a while with a administrative procedure to follow. I think there's a question, and then I can move on after, because I'm going to explain what's going on with the second set of it as well.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Can we just say fiscal management of school properties and get rid of the disposal? Because we're talking about leasing property, and then we're labeling it as disposal. So can we just...
I would suggest not, because when you get to the administrative procedures, you'll see there's discussion of disposing of, it's not just real property, it's also, the real property is real estate, but also personal property. So there's a section on what do you do with old desks, what do you do with old books, what do you do with old computers, and that's why because my initial suggestion to Mrs. Oquist was to just remove DO from the face of the earth, and she pointed out that there is some value in it still. So that statement is essentially saying we will dispose of property according to law, and then when you look at the administrative procedures, we do want to get rid of some of the information about real estate disposal or refer people back to our EBA, but then the school properties disposal, I said personal property, but school property disposal procedure, it still has value. So if there's a way to do that some other way, I'm all ears. Yes?
Can we change disposal to disposition?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Okay. I like that.
Dispossession. I think in this it would be disposition.
Okay.
And we actually have used references a couple of times this year, just internally, as you know, we've replaced some things, and we've said, okay, we've had requests, for instance, to purchase if you can believe it, the auditorium seats, you know.
I believe that.
And so we've done that, and so we had to take a look at the value, when could I approve that, when could we accept that versus when did it, so it certainly, we think still serves a purpose. We'd like to retain this, because that has given us good guideline. It also says at the very end, because oftentimes we're asked, what are you going to do with the desks? What are you going to do with the chairs? And we know that we try to sell every last living paperclip that we may not use. We also know from Mr. Lau and Mr. Francis that sometimes we actually expend more in time, energy, and funds trying to sell something as opposed to simply disposing of it or having that be part of the contract as we receive, for instance, new furniture. And so that last piece also allows us to say if reasonable attempts have been made, then we have the authority to dispose of them in another way. And so there is still value in these procedures.
Right. So a lot of this, if you're going to say, I'm not an attorney, but I think if you're going to say school properties and the disposition of it, we've got to have some mention of the real property in here, because it's a simple one to look up and say, this has to do with property, let me see what they're talking about. So we try to address that in the administrative procedures of stating, like, please go see this portion, go see EBA if you're looking for real property disposition, and then we can keep the school properties. Do you want that disposal or change the disposition again? Is disposal more appropriate? I think sometimes disposal is more appropriate for the school property, because if it's wood that nobody wants, we might be disposing of it. So you can tell me whatever language you want, but I think that or the title you want, but I think that language beneath it is important, because it does give us the guidance that we've already used this school year in what to do with those things.
But it doesn't, and I'm just reading through it, it doesn't say anything about leasing the property, right? Under school properties disposal procedure, it's about actually disposing of all the property.
Well,
Okay, or no?
well, I don't know, when you get to this procedure, doesn't this have rental
Or excess in those amounts, 4 months.
on the next, are you talking about the board policy?
I'm talking about that last school properties disposal procedure at the bottom of the page. It doesn't talk.
No, because that's
Worn-out stuff you can't rent.
it's items, yeah.
Okay.
I guess you could rent them out, but it's items.
So it should, does this need to be the same?
Yeah, that's at the top of the page where you have board policy, you have
this
fiscal
say
management, school
disposition on
properties, disposition, and then
Yeah,
the
I think
next
I think
page
that's
is-
just missing the word up here.
Okay.
It should be,
It should say-
that word should be added on administrative
Okay,
procedures.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I will add that.
But we're still figuring out if we want disposal or disposition.
So I have disposition on the tops of both of these. I'm just wondering if under this lower heading, if disposal procedure is still appropriate. But how about I read through the whole thing? And let's make sure we don't miss something in here that potentially should be addressed. So this was from March of 1990. Revenues from school-owned real estate. The property formerly serving as district schools or classrooms may be rented at current market prices toward the goal that it will be income producing for the district. And then we changed the business manager to the superintendent or his/her designee will administer the leases and provide for maintenance of the property, except as the board approves appointment of an agent to serve in this capacity. And then the note is getting us over to the lease section. So this category pertains to property owned by the school district, but not used for school purposes, such as school lands, vacated school buildings, lands held in trust. Details pertaining to administration of leases are better filed under, and this is one of these that we found that it was no longer that lettering. It's DFG, fees, payments, and rentals, and the related policy area noted in the cross-reference. So that's the part that, it does mention lease at the top, but simply, I think because if someone shows up with, well, if you're getting rid of an old, what are you doing with an old building? Oh, you could lease it out. If so, go here to see about leases.
So then I think we need to change the cross-reference. It says cross-reference board policy EBA. I think we also need to add DFG.
At the
Because
bottom.
we referenced that. So if we go to board policy DO, we'll cross-reference both of those policies.
Yeah, cross-reference EBA.
Does that make sense?
And
Okay.
DFG.
Mhm.
Okay. Then we get into real estate disposal procedure. If any school-owned real estate is no longer needed for public school purposes, the board will dispose of it in a manner prescribed by state law. Please see EBA disposition of real property.
So we need to change that to reflect the changes you
Right.
asked
Yeah,
for in
the
number
first
2,
one, yeah.
correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right, I'll make note of that.
Oh, yeah. We're gonna follow the law.
Yes.
Why?
We might sell it, we will follow the law.
And then we removed that second piece because it was, I mean, we don't need it anymore in there, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, because in the other procedure, we said that we
can't,
can't sell it, so.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's essentially, if this is what you're looking for, go to EBA.
Right.
And then the school property disposal procedures, which we already discussed, is valuable because it does have meaning and value to us.
So while I have everyone here, I'm going to read what the rewritten sentence is from before and now so that we all know what that is. So in that middle section, it starts with if any school-owned. If any school-owned real estate is no longer needed for public school purposes, comma, and the board chooses to dispossess the property, comma, the board will proceed in the manner prescribed by state law. Remove the word "it."
Yep.
Is that okay? So we're not using too many different words to say, get rid of? Okay. And we'll reflect that in the first one as well.
Any other comments on administrative procedure? Everyone else set?
As Mrs. Oquist said, I mean, you've got time to put some fresh eyes on it on another day and see anything, and we'll put this back on for the committee of the whole on June 19th.
Is that what you would prefer?
If you'd like.
Put it back on for committee of the whole, or?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And just.
We'll put this in the packet.
Clean copy.
Oh, we'll put it in the packet this week with the clean copies,
Yeah.
so that you have time to take a look at it.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Burton.
Do we need to define immediate family? I mean, does immediate family would mean spouse, children, but does it also mean brother, sister, does it also mean
Mother,
parent?
father.
Right.
You
I mean,
are
it's-
on the
I'm
original
on
EBA?
Administrative Procedure DO. Second to the
Last
bottom
page, very last
paragraph.
end of it.
Oh, 'cause
In
we were in
other
both
areas of
places.
policy, and I don't remember which one it is, but in other areas of policy, we have defined, but in parentheses, it's just according to state law, what immediate family is.
Steps and everything else, like, stepmother and everything else, or?
Because
Yeah.
it means different things to different people.
In loco parentis is not.
Well, and interestingly, in EBA, the final sentence says, employees of the school district and members of the Board of Education
Will not.
shall be prohibited from. So that does not state family members.
Right.
But when we're talking about disposing of school books and desks,
Then it can't even be
we're
their
saying
brother.
you definitely can't sell an old book to your aunt.
Right.
And so I'm wondering
But the
if.
building, sure.
If we would like those to be congruent, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And so, we will rewrite that. We will also take a look at how the law defines that.
Right.
And then make a recommendation on that language.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
We don't have like a separate policy, right, that says immediate family is that
No.
something that I don't know if does that need to be a separate policy so that we don't have all this redundancy and then
I don't think so necessarily, because it may
We don't
mean
refer to it very
different,
often.
it may mean something different if we are speaking
In
of a
different
student,
policies.
exactly, a student and their parent,
Okay.
as opposed to who can buy a piece of land.
Okay, agreed.
That's when there's a conflict of interest, when there isn't.
Okay. Agreed.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Just to confirm, we want to make the administrative procedure of DO with family look like EBA or vice versa?
We're gonna
Think
consult
about it.
council.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then take a look at how the law defines that, and then we'll make a recommendation, just so that they're
Just so that they
congruent.
match,
Yeah.
right. There's
Do you-
valid thought on both, going both ways, but that they do need to match.
And do you want it to include immediate family? That's really the bigger question, I guess, before we try to wordsmith that. Right now, EBA says employees, no, board members, no. It does not say immediate family.
It does say directly or indirectly, does it not?
One
It-
says
it
directly or
says-
indirectly.
Right.
Yes.
The policy says.
Right, the policy says directly or indirectly, but that just refers to employees of the district and members of the board.
Right.
Doesn't have any reference to family members.
I think that they should certainly be consistent.
And I think they need to be super clear because we get into
gets messy.
situations
Yeah.
where,
Okay, I have my brother-in-law.
right, is it
Private
my
property.
brother-in-law's sister's cousin's aunt, and then somebody could say, well, that's a direct link, and I don't know, six degrees of separation, but I think it needs to be very clear or we don't get into a situation.
There are certain statutes that define.
Well, one is
What-
conflict of interest.
what
We have
families
policy
are.
on conflict of interest, and it states what the legal language is. So we can look that up and
Yeah,
and
we
take a
should
look at it.
follow
But
that.
overall, do you want it to reflect beyond you and beyond employees? Do you want it to include all of your family, however that's defined? Or do you want to leave it with employees in the Board of Education?
This is just for school property.
We're gonna make them the same though. We're talking about
We're gonna
making
make
them
both the
the
same.
same. Real property and school property.
Yeah. You know what, I'm sorry, no, you had
Sorry,
first, go
I
ahead.
interrupted.
So, I think that if we limit it too much, we're cutting off our nose to spite our face. I mean, okay, I can see, family member or board, school employees and board members, that's a direct conflict of interest. But beyond that, we have set up so many protocols to get to the place where we are going to sell. We go out for bids, we get appraisals and stuff like that. And for us to limit, because if we're selling property, it's not just on a whim, like we said, we need to sell the property and there's a reason that we're selling it. And if we limit the number of people that we can sell it to, and potentially someone that may bid higher than someone else, that we want, we may lose a higher bid because, we're limiting our pool of purchasers. I find it really hard to believe that we're ever gonna get into a situation where there's something hinky going on and we're, selling something under the table and there's some nefarious stuff going on. Sorry.
Nefarious
Want to
stuff.
buy a textbook?
I know. Not only that, you
$2.
mentioned a few minutes ago, someone asked to purchase seats from the auditorium. I can understand, at first glance, it sounded kind of crazy. Within 3 seconds, I thought, you know what? If you were in theater and you might want a bank of 4 or 6 of those for your basement, that might be really cool. The way this is written, we can't sell them to any of our family members. Meaning if we're selling bricks from Bentley High School, no family member of any employee of the district could buy them. That's crazy. I don't think that was the intent of this policy. Looking at it that way, I would go back more toward the language of the first policy that we looked at, is that board members and employees can't buy them, but cannot purchase that. And remove the words immediate family from DO.
Mr. Center?
Great.
I think the only problem with that is Phil really wants his property, his spouse could then buy it if we don't exclude immediate family. And that would certainly be a conflict of interest, though. So I think for property, we should include immediate family that we should limit it so that immediate family cannot buy. But when it comes to real property, when it becomes to disposition for books or seats or whatever, it makes sense that, anyone in the district can buy it.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. I hear what you're saying, Dan, but if you read on EBA, the very last sentence, employees of the school district and members of the Board of Education shall be prohibited from purchasing directly or indirectly. So if Mr. Francis were to send his brother-in-law as his agent, that would be indirectly. It's already forbidden.
Oh.
One thing, I think it's, with regard to the real property, I think that's a higher standard and
Yes.
burden for us, I think, than the desks or other property, which we're saying clearly does not have value, significant value to us. To be honest, when I first read EBA, I struggled even a bit with, as we talk about this in relation to family, because it really, to me, should be potentially included if it's anyone who has knowledge about the value of that property. So board members, cabinet members, folks who are involved in preparing the request for quote, have met in closed session with regard to our consultant or our broker that has that information. To me, in that case, I think including family or immediate family would be appropriate. I don't know that that would extend to every employee of the school district, so there's someone who is a teacher in one of our schools, whose father is a builder. They would not have information that we would have or that the board would have in that same regard. So I don't know if you would be comfortable having it state something like employees of the school district and members of the Board of Education or the board member's immediate family or something, and then we have that defined, are prohibited from purchasing directly or indirectly. Because I think it should be related to who would have information that would provide a leg up on bidding on that property or knowledge about when it's going to go up for bid, et cetera. I would think of our 1,900 staff, there would only be a limited number that would really have information about valuation of our properties. So if that helps or muddies the waters.
I think that helps, personally.
Yeah, I would much rather have it specify people with, individuals directly related to the sale or with direct knowledge of property values, rather than just saying immediate, I go back to, I think it just really limits our pool of purchasers and could wind up biting us in the end.
Mrs. Jarvis?
And the reverse of that is also true when it comes to the disposition of school property, textbooks, auditorium chairs. Why not have the immediate families have a shot at it?
Right, because we're going to be the first ones that, right? We're the most invested in the district. We're going to be.
If somebody wants to build a little home theater and put in the chairs from Churchill, let them do it.
For it. I agree.
I presume years ago it was put together so that staff members didn't say, this is junk, we should get rid of it. Oh, I'll take it. That's probably, but like you're saying, if you were a longtime arts teacher or theater teacher at one of the buildings and you put on a gazillion performances there and you wanted to have two of the seats, it makes all the sense in the world, yeah.
Well, and I think we don't allow those kind of things to happen anyway, right? I mean, there's a lot of procedures that we get to before the disposition of those properties. So it's not like a nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's,
It's a safety valve.
There's a lot of other steps.
And those
that
were
we have
actually
to-
sold to entire school districts in
Yeah, it wasn't
totality,
people.
which was nice because for them, they were able to update their auditorium.
Got a
Why
nice
don't,
chalkboard for sale.
why don't we take a stab at both of those? We'll include it and highlight for you so you know where those changes are. And we'll we'll take our best stab at that. And then please feel free to respond after you receive the update in preparation for the next committee meeting. And then also at that committee meeting, we can continue to take modifications and recommended changes.
Yes. One other question. On board policy DO, is the word personal the appropriate word to be, to refer to property that's books, seats, et cetera? It is? Okay.
Yes, that is personal property.
Okay, even if it's owned by a school district, not an individual or a family?
Yeah,
Yes.
it refers to the type of property.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. And Mrs. Opus, regarding your comments of getting back, please do make sure, as we always do, that if you need to reply, you reply back just singularly to Mrs. Opus, who can get the information to all of the board, and not reply back all, so that all of our conversation as a group is happening at our board table.
Thank you very much for that.
That wraps up policy?
Yes.
And we're all set?
Where did the agenda go now? Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Frank and Mr. Francis, everybody. The next item on our agenda is item 7, Personnel Committee. I do not have anything on the agenda. Mr. Centers, do you have anything?
We do
Mrs.
not.
Oquist?
We do not.
No? Item 8 is Legislative Committee. I don't have any agenda item. Mrs. Jarvis, do you have anything?
Other than that, we're all still waiting.
Yes, still waiting and still advocating.
Waiting and advocating.
Okay. Mrs. Oquist, do you have anything else for legislative?
No, I snuck that in under the budget, so.
Right ahead, yep. All righty. We have reached the end of our agenda this evening. I wish you all a nice evening, and we are now adjourned. Thank you.